President Andrew Jackson. Numerous people contributed to making the United States the flourishing nation it is today. One pivotal character in U.S. history was Andrew Jackson. The first words of the U.S. Constitution are, "We the people," and Jackson fully espoused the American concept that government is granted power by its citizens. Since he won 56% of the vote in the 1828 election, he was clearly a president of the people. Jackson believed the government should represent the views of the populace and that it should be comprised of ordinary citizens. He also held that limited government is best and that the limitation should be imposed by the people. Prior to Jackson's election, South Carolina had established an ordinance nullifying certain federal tariffs. The state's leaders had assumed that Jackson, who was the first president from west of the Appalachians, would reduce or eliminate these tariffs. When he instead signed a compromise tariff bill in 1832, South Carolina held a state convention and again declared the federal tariff unconstitutional. In response, Jackson requested and received permission from the U.S. Congress to send troops to South Carolina. Before matters could escalate any further, a new compromise tariff act was signed by Jackson, one more agreeable to South Carolina. Though it is argued that approving troop action against a state violated states' rights, the action was considered necessary to keep the Union together. The Constitution was written to keep the 13 original colonies together, and by sending troops into South Carolina in order to maintain the Union, Jackson was not in violation. The Constitution had been constructed, agreed to, and signed by the original 13 states that consisted of both northern and southern former British colonies, including South Carolina. To nullify the standards set by that document would be to renege on that agreement. When opposing South Carolina's ordinance of nullification, the North asserted that the Union could live in peace and plenty without the South raising arms. In the Hayne versus Webster debate, Webster argued that even the South acknowledged it was risking a civil war by initiating the nullification crisis. By interpreting the binding document of the nation, the Constitution, differently, the South risked a dramatic break with the North. In order to keep South Carolina from seceding, Jackson took the rational action of compromise and the threatening action of a military presence in order to keep the country united. As president, Jackson took actions that benefited the nation as a whole. If in fact Jackson's threat of sending troops into South Carolina was a violation of states' rights, it can also be argued that South Carolina had already violated the binding contract of the Constitution by attempting to nullify federal law. The Constitution is based on a belief in equality among both citizens and states. South Carolina's action threatened that balance. The new nation had been founded on a belief in an equal society where the government's power is limited by the people. By asserting the right to nullify bills, South Carolina attempted to put itself apart and above a supposedly united nation. Jackson's intentions were for the good of the nation, to keep the nation united. 1984. 1984 by George Orwell portrays the life of a citizen existing in an extremely corrupt environment where every movement of every individual is monitored by the inner circle. This group is composed of a small number of high-level government officials. The word brainwashed accurately describes these people. Winston Smith, a minor clerk in the Ministry of Truth, is one of the few who see the inner circle for what it really is, corrupt and absurd. On the outside, Winston must keep his composure so as not to give away his true thoughts. The thought police punish any who even think of going against the ultimate dictator, Big Brother. The slogans, "War is peace," "Freedom is slavery," "Ignorance is strength," are repeated throughout the society. The thought police, the government's enforcers, impose order mainly by suppressing any expression of individuality, including even thoughts of freedom or sex. Many are arrested for face crimes, exhibiting facial expressions that disclose true feelings of disloyalty toward the government. At his job, Winston meets Julia, a dark-haired girl significantly younger than himself. Their affair starts when she hands him a note saying, "I love you." They keep their relationship a secret out of fear of being caught by the thought police. Winston knows the relationship can't last, but is willing to see it through until the end. Winston and Julia join the Brotherhood, a group resisting Big Brother, with the character O'Brien, whom they think is a fellow secret insurrectionist. At the beginning of the relationship, Winston doesn't realize O'Brien is a member of the inner circle, whose job is to trick subversives into confiding in him so they can be identified and punished. Winston and Julia are eventually so broken by the torture they experience that they renounce all their previously held subversive ideas and associations. My favorite passage of 1984. "Do anything to me," he yelled. "You've been starving me for weeks. Finish it off and let me die. Shoot me. Hang me. Sentence me to 25 years. Is there somebody else you want me to give away? Just say who it is, and I'll tell you anything you want. I don't care who it is or what you do to them. I've got a wife and 3 children. The biggest of them isn't 6 years old. You can take the whole lot of them and cut their throats in front of my eyes, and I'll stand by and watch it, but not room 101. I feel this is one of the most powerful passages. It exemplifies how those captured react to the torture and punishments of the thought police. The fact that family means nothing to this man after what he has been through expresses a great deal. This is relevant because the inner circle has even put restrictions on the rate of procreation. 1984 relates to what we are studying currently, specifically One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Both works explore the lives of prisoners. Winston, in 1984, is initially solely a prisoner of the mind, while Sukov is physically a prisoner. The conditions of the imprisonment in these books are comparable. Every action of the citizen is monitored and can arouse suspicion. The face crimes in 1984 can be compared to any belief not in compliance with Stalin's in One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Both actions are considered crimes by the hierarchy because they symbolize individuality and free thought. Both Big Brother and Stalin feel that free thought must be annihilated. Both books are great examples of the behaviors of dictators and the actions carried out by government in totalitarian society. The contribution of Germany to the world. 1. Improving nutrition worldwide. Germany recognizes the importance of improving nutrition worldwide in order to achieve international prosperity. The German Nutrition Society is a government-sponsored research organization established in 1953 to study nutritional science as well as to implement certain nutritional food standards in the country. According to the DGE, the 3-system food pyramid is a healthy and productive nutrition system that, if followed, provides a preferred balanced diet. People who live on such a diet will take in a good balance of vitamins, trace elements, and electrolytes. Since fats in this program are reduced to a very small proportion and eating plant-based foods is given greater emphasis, people that follow this 3-system food pyramid are bound to consume the nutrients required for good health. Germany's commitment to improving worldwide nutrition has been noteworthy over time. Germany annually spends 6.75 million euros on domestic nutritional research and 18 billion euros to supply offices and schools with healthy and balanced lunches. The German Institution of Human Nutrition researches the field of nutrition and health with the goal of understanding nutrition at a molecular level in order to strategize preventative methods and treatments for micro-malnutrition as well as protein-based malnutrition. In 2001, legal regulations were established under statutory health insurance to cover any preventative nutrition courses. In 2000, the German Dietitians Association legally declared that dietary intervention is a therapy that should be covered under state insurance. Because of Germany's efforts in researching this important issue, Germany can guide other governments in the process of improving nutrition in their respective countries. The United Nations World Health Organization published a statement that macronutrient consumption should be in proportions of 30% fat, 55% carbohydrates, and 12 to 15% protein. In order to provide children with the required number of calories, Germany suggests that the UN work through GAIN and Stop Hunger Now to provide adequate prenatal and postnatal nourishment corresponding with the three-system food pyramid in order to better serve children in countries in need. Germany proposes that international reputable non-governmental organizations such as the WHO and the United Nations Foundation fund the work of improving nutrition worldwide so that these efforts do not breach national sovereignties. Germany believes it is of the utmost importance to provide children and expectant mothers with the proper nutrition they require to foster positive development. 2. Combating climate change and supporting sustainable energy. Germany advocates supporting developing countries economically so that they are able to independently create environmentally sustainable and sufficient energy programs, as well as limit polluting energy types which drastically contribute to climate change. Germany is in full support of Resolution 44-228, the UN FCCC, and the Convention on Biological Diversity, which are part of Agenda 21 and Earth Summit +5. According to Dirk Niebel, German Federal Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development, a key issue to be addressed in the international climate process is the question of how to fund climate action in the developing countries. For example, mitigation of climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adaptation to its impacts. It is down to all of us, governments, industry, and every individual, to take urgently needed action to avert the worst impacts of climate change and limit average global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. But we need this action now because time is running out. Current research by the University of Berlin, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration asserts that climate change is a result of anthropogenic emissions in the tropospheric ozone. Germany spent over €1 billion to finance a multitude of multilateral and bilateral projects to fast-start projects that combat climate change. It is currently working in Ethiopia, Mali, Tunisia, the Congo Basin, South Africa, Mozambique, and elsewhere to reduce emissions, prevent deforestation, reduce erosion, and develop low-carbon development strategies. Germany proposes that the United Nations Environmental Program works with Greenpeace on individually designed and standardized projects for each country. It is critical to improve energy efficiency, increase the use of renewables, expand the carbon and emissions trade markets, reduce greenhouse gases, and develop sustainable transport and waste management systems. Hence, Germany is in favor of Resolution 63-210. Germany further encourages the UN to support methods of developing means of creating sustainable energy by harnessing wind and solar energy in the Middle East and North Africa region. The alternative energy to be harnessed in these areas, as well as in Europe, Asia, and sub-Saharan Africa, could dramatically reduce overall anthropogenic emissions. Guatemala Crisis. Thesis. The CIA's 1954 backing and instigating of the overthrow of the Guatemalan government, ascribed to the U.S.'s concern the country would become communist, was a turning point in U.S. Central American bilateral relations, which impacts these matters to this day. The coup d'etat fomented the Cuban Missile Crisis as the U.S. held the false belief that its actions in Guatemala should be regarded as a model for combating communism. General overview. This CIA-backed coup occurred during the Eisenhower administration. The U.S. government opposed the Guatemalan president's plans to essentially nationalize uncultivated land controlled by the United Fruit Company, UFCO, in order to reallocate it to the native population. UFCO and its investors convinced the CIA, and by extension the U.S. government, that this was the first step toward a communist government. Guatemalan exiles trained by the CIA attacked June 18, 1954, backed by the CIA, which had been using radio broadcasts and leaflet drops on the capital to create the illusion that a larger and stronger force was involved. Operations. Operation PB Fortune was a precursor to the coup, executed by the CIA in 1951. The operation was officially initiated on the 9th of September in 1952, though actions had been taken earlier in the year in January. The chief of the Western Hemisphere Division, J.C. King, supplied arms to Castillo Armas. The weaponry was packed and ready to be shipped in early October. President Somoza of Nicaragua and President Galvez of Honduras were convinced to lend additional aid. Soon after, President Somoza blew the cover of the operation by spreading word of the CIA's actions in Central America. Once the plan for PB Fortune was public, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Edward Miller immediately terminated it. The appearance that the United States was supporting the invasion of an OAS member state in retaliation for expropriating American property would set U.S. policy back 20 years, he said. The 1947 Rio Pact created the Organization of American States that recognized the obligation of each member to counter an armed attack on any other member country. Guatemalan history. Juan José Arévalo was elected president of Guatemala in 1944. Under his administration, a new constitution was established in March of 1945. Among the other civil rights it established, it granted women the right to vote. Other rights included were freedom of speech and of the press. Labor unions and political reforms previously prohibited were legalized and allowed. Arévalo embraced spiritual socialism, which provides for the well-being of all citizens of a country. During his term of 5 years, he passed a labor code protecting the rights of laborers, as well as establishing their right to certain benefits. He encouraged the population of Guatemala to engage in politics and made health care and education available to all. Arévalo supported labor in both industry and agriculture in Guatemala. Arbenz Guzman's land reform stirred up conflict within Guatemala, as he planned to take land from the upper class and reallocate it among rural workers. The law was written to keep the coffee planters safe, but was characterized by opponents, the rich and U.S. interests, as an assault on free enterprise. The compensation Arbenz Guzman offered UFCO was thought inadequate by the company that had long benefited from its treatment by an earlier dictatorship. Effects and results. The U.S.-backed coup and long-term impacts on Guatemalan-U.S. relations, as well as overall U.S.-South American relations, became a symbol of armed resistance to U.S. hegemony. Though there were many consequences to the operation, most notable was the end of Decree 900. This was an action initiated by President Arbenz, which attempted to move the country from federalism into capitalism. The decree primarily benefited the native Mayan and other poor populations by redistributing Guatemala's land to them while giving government bonds to the rich as compensation in order to ending the wealthy's stranglehold on the land. After Decree 900 was nullified and President Arbenz killed, the U.S. installed Colonel Castillo, another repressive and corrupt leader. 7 years after the Guatemalan coup d'etat, Allen Dulles advised U.S. President John F. Kennedy to use that U.S. intervention as a model for the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba in 1961. The Bay of Pigs fiasco led directly to the Cuban Missile Crisis. This event impacts not just U.S.-Cuban relations, but also U.S.-Soviet and post-Soviet relations to this day. Process paper. Once we started exploring National History Day in class, we began to consider topics. We wanted our project to address an uncommon issue or topic. I traveled to Guatemala a few years ago and thought it would be interesting to do focus on something related to that country. We were also interested in the CIA as a group, so we chose to do the interference of the CIA in Guatemala. Our research started with reading as many primary and secondary source documents we could find online. While engaging in this, we found books on the topic that provided a huge amount of information about the situation in Guatemala. We got these books online, which seemed like the most reasonable method of accessing them. After thoroughly ransacking the internet and local libraries for all the credible information we could find, which included first-hand reports from involved CIA agents, we located contact information for the authors of these works, as well as that of professors in this field. Though there was a multitude of people to choose from, we chose those who seemed most credible and emailed each a series of interview questions. Moreover, to further enhance our research, we watched informational videos on the Guatemalan coup d'etat that included first-hand footage with commentaries on the situation. One video we watched was a documentary around 45 minutes long, which provided a great number of insights and opinions on this operation. Another was a short with first-hand footage narrated by a professor. These were extremely helpful in fully understanding our topic and gave us huge insight and perspective. We chose to present our project in the form of a website because we thought it would be the best way of presenting the balance of pictures, text, and video. Additionally, we were familiar with the website creator application, Weebly, which we thought would make the process more fun for all. Furthermore, it also helped make our project more accessible to us, as we could both access the website at any time and from anywhere. Operation PB Success was a major turning point in history for several reasons. The first is that it deterred Guatemala from becoming a communist government, while also not cause bloodshed in Guatemala. What's more, it was the model for the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Another reason this operation can be considered a turning point is that it had critical impact on U.S.-South American bilateral and multilateral relations and acted as a fulcrum for how the U.S. is currently perceived today throughout the world. The True Heroes. A countless number of poems, legends, and epics have been written in nearly every culture, which include the character of the admirable hero. While the definition of a hero is different in every culture, every hero possesses certain characteristics such as humility, selflessness, and devotion. Though these heroic characteristics are well represented in a multitude of literature, Wart from King Arthur's Legend, Harry Potter from J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, and Sibi from Mahabharata demonstrate these qualities particularly well. Wart, Harry, and Sibi are not swayed from their paths of purpose and determination, which keeps them humble and modest. Wart understands that although status comes with power and respect, being of high status is not the only way to obtain respect. Furthermore, Wart sees that the misuse of power, which many desire, can transform a society into a tyrannical system. He understands how having power over animals can make man a tyrant, a lesson he learns after his mentor Merlin turns him into a badger. Additionally, Wart continues to respect Sir Ector, even after he discovers he is the right-wise king-born of all England. Because Sir Ector raised him, Wart recognizes and appreciates the effort Sir Ector put into raising him, and refuses to disregard his mentor, looking quite old and powerless and kneeling with difficulty on a gouty knee, even when he realizes he is king. Similarly, when Harry learns he is the chosen one, he decides to stick to his friends, Ron and Hermione, rather than seeking friends who might have been of higher status. Harry rejects Draco Malfoy's offer of friendship and says he can tell who the wrong sort are for himself. Furthermore, Harry loathes the whispers following him from the moment he leaves his dormitory. Harry ignores the fame and attention and is determined to destroy Voldemort. Seaby, like Harry and Wart, is also a king of an Indian society from 200 BC to 300 AD who sees his people as his equals. He is not satisfied until all his guests are happy. Seaby seeks his happiness only after his people's happiness is ensured. Additionally, he makes sure his people are safe and content and believes that it is his duty to protect them as their king. All three of these heroes remain modest by recognizing the importance of all people, whether they be those who raise them, friends, or the people of their land. Not only are these heroes humble, they are also goal-oriented. For Kay, Wart gives up seeing the beginning of the wondrous London tournament to find him a sword. Upon finding the sword stuck in the stone in front of the church, Wart asks of Merlin to help him get the weapon. Harry, as a modern realm hero, dedicates his life to destroying Lord Voldemort. Starting with the Philosopher's Stone and ending with the Deathly Hallows, Harry defeats Voldemort time after time until the scar did not pain Harry for 19 years, and all was well. From the position of king, Seaby devotes himself to his people and is willing to do absolutely anything for them. He chooses to sacrifice his own warm flesh with warm blood dripping, equal in weight to the dove, rather than kill another creature for it. Whether the actions are for a people as a leader or a certain individual, neither Wart, Harry, or Seaby abandons his duties. Instead, each works to fulfill responsibility. As an extension of their humility, Wart, Harry, and Seaby put others before them. Wart cares more about his stepbrother Kay's needs than his own, since Sir Ector always brought him up to believe his future would be as a mere low-ranking squire. At the tournament in London, where the king will be decided, Kay forgets his sword at the inn. He sends his squire Wart to retrieve it. Wart feels that Kay shall have a sword of some sort if he has to break into the Tower of London. Upon finding the doors to the inn locked, Wart roams the streets wondering where he could steal one or take one from a knight by force. While Wart could have given up on finding a sword for Kay when he found the doors locked, Wart persists until he finds a sword for Kay. Likewise, Harry puts forth all his power to save his friends on more than one occasion. To save Neville Longbottom's Remembrall, Harry disobeys Madam Hooch's order to stay on the ground during Quidditch class and gets on his broom to face Draco Malfoy. Harry risks the consequences for his friend Neville. As well, it is evident that Seaby would do anything to help others when he refuses to give up the dove in his lap to the hawk. He goes as far as promising the hawk his flesh and nothing less. As a sincere king, he regards the lives and well-being of others far more highly than his. No matter how small the action, these true heroes try to benefit others rather than themselves in every situation. Even with differing views and beliefs, each culture holds certain values by which they judge an admirable figure in their society. Someone that is humble, selfless, and devoted is considered commendable. As seen in both modern literature, such as Harry Potter and Wart, and ancient works like the Mahabharata, the characteristics that distinguish a hero are generally exceptionally alike. Resilience of the human spirit. One of the primary methods of coping with suffering is to keep one's spirits up, also known as the quality of resilience. The three characters from One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, Zhukov, Alyosha, and Caesar, work together to keep each other's spirits up, but more importantly, to survive the harsh conditions of the labor camps they are consigned to under Stalin's reign. The resilience of the human spirit within prison inmates in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich serves to unite them and forms an inalienable bond that makes it possible to continue working every seemingly endless day. Ivan Denisovich, better known as Zhukov, always gets up at the call in order to keep the small side jobs he has. Shukov devotes himself to work, and the work of the labor camps proves to be what Shukov holds on to. He finds joy in subtle and mundane events, such as a great day for bricklaying. Shukov does not spend his time in the camp working to bide his time until his sentence is done, but instead to finish the job that is assigned to him each day. Shukov takes great pride in his work. He believes his work to be equal to the work of Andrei Prokofyevich, the foreman. Shukov generally called him Andrei Prokofyevich, but working as he was now made him the foreman's equal. He didn't put it in words himself, just felt it. His work contribution causes him to receive the rations of a higher-ranking prisoner. After his gang receives its parcels, Shukov gets more of others' rations, which is a holiday for him. Shukov puts so much into his work that at the end of the day, he no longer knows whether he wants to be freed or not. Goes to sleep, feeling pleased with life, and knows if they're without, they can always earn something. As Shukov puts faith in his work, his neighbor, Alyashka, puts his faith in the Bible and God. Alyashka, the Baptist, is often described as reading his Bible, happy and smiling. Alyashka, along with the other Baptists, believe that it is God's plan for them to be in the camps, and therefore, life in the camp is like water off a duck's back to them. Alyashka's strong faith in God allows him to be glad he's in prison, and that praying to God about freedom will not do anyone any good, since once one is free, their faith will soon be choked by thorns. Alyashka works to fulfill God's plan for him, and he is much more interested in replenishing his soul than his body. He believes that the adversity of the work and harsh conditions in the camps are for his benefit, and strives to work due to his feeling that this feeds his soul. He believes it is his duty to do the work presented to him to the best of his ability. Unlike Shukov, Alyashka does his time in the camps with faith that it is God's plan distinctively made for him. Cesar, Shukov's wealthy neighbor, obtains joy from sharing the parcels he often receives and derives pleasure from sharing. He enjoys his role in the camps of providing his friends with the little things that make their days. Cesar gives Shukov a little smile and says, No, eat it yourself, Shukov," as if knowing Shukov is asking for his dinner ration. The inmates look forward to Cesar's parcels during the workday, sometimes it being their only hope. Cesar gets his resilience from his outside wealth. Cesar's wealth does not only bring his own spirits up, it brings up the spirits of the other inmates as well. Cesar relies on his wealth to support him in the camps, whether it is to bond with people of higher authority or to gain respect from other prisoners. Cesar is a kind of person that brings the zeks to work hard during the day, giving them hopes of a reward of hard work at the end of it. Each zek in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich is a part of an aspect of hope in the labor camps, and each zek has their own anchor that holds them together, working. Whether it is the work itself, faith, or camaraderie, they all serve the purpose, the united purpose of working that bonds the inmates together, creating a strong workforce. The full experience. I had what people would call a fantabulous summer. 2 days after finals were over, I was bound for Hawaii. After 2 weeks in paradise, I then went to Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam with my brother. On the day of departure from Korea to Bangkok, Thailand, we had to get up at the unholy hour of 4 a.m., take the bus to Incheon International Airport, and catch our flight. The 5.5-hour flight was as good as it could get, considering the middle-aged men who seemed to think they hit their midlife crisis and thus were under the wrong impression that it was completely acceptable to get very, very drunk on a plane that already reeked. No, that's not socially acceptable. Anyway, we spent our days in Bangkok meandering the streets, trying street foods such as mango with sticky rice, learning short phrases of Thai, and taking a multitude of pictures. We visited ancient temples, had a taste of home at the Siam Paragon Mall, by which I mean I was literally forced to take pictures of my brother next to much too luxurious cars and experience the best massages of our lives. The days in Bangkok were swift, and then it was time to go to Cambodia. Having to wake up at 5 in the morning to catch the train to the border of Thailand at 5:55 a.m., we packed our backpacks the night before. At 5:30 a.m., we hailed a taxi from our hostel to the train station. The thing about taxis in Thailand is that none of the drivers know where anything is, so it took another 5 minutes to get anywhere. The train ride from Walampong train station in Bangkok to Poi Phet was about 6 hours, and for less than $2, anyone could ride it. It was obviously not a luxury train, but it was much better than what I was expecting. The windows were only just a little rickety, the train only a little wobbly on the tracks, the seats only a bit blackened, and there were only so many spider webs that I could count with both of my hands. There were even people walking up and down the aisle selling various drinks and snacks. Thinking back, I would choose this train over any luxury train given the chance again. Sure, it smelled like crap, and one of us had to be awake to watch our stuff. But still, there is no better way to get the full experience, right? During the 6-hour ride, slipping between delirium and reality, I managed to take in the breathtaking scenery. It was so lush, with endless fields of green, and the occasional water buffalo grazing. Now, water buffaloes are the closest thing to a dinosaur I've ever seen. They look kind of like a stegosaurus from afar, actually. We eventually arrived at the Thai and Cambodian border to be raided by tuk-tuk, motorcycles with a carrier, drivers, offering rides to the official visa place. We accepted because we had nothing else to do, and were taken to a building with a couple of chairs and officials dressed very casually. They demanded what would be equivalent to $40 from us for our visas, when it should have been $20. My gut feeling and spirit angel was giving me a "get the heck out of here" message. So we trekked on with the girl we had just met at the sketchy building to find that 200 meters from that building was the official border. We passed through with our visas, and with only a little bit more trouble, we were in Cambodia. From the official visa place in Cambodia, we were loaded onto a bus along with a bunch of other Asian tourists, looking quite stylish, really, with their fanny packs and selfie-taking devices in a tour group, and taken to another sort of station for our ride to Siem Reap. We were given a few options, but we went with a minivan for 10 people that would drop each of us off at our accommodation. On our entire Southeast Asia trip, this might have been our smartest decision, for this is where we met Danny and Sean, with whom we would travel to Vietnam. Danny is British and Sean is Canadian. Once we arrived in Siem Reap, the van turned out to be a scam, and we were dropped off and left to find our own separate ways. Although many people were angry, I was in more of an, "Oh, this is great, cheers to the full experience, yeah buddy, F yeah" mood. Eventually, we came to an agreement where we would be given free tuk-tuk rides to our hostels. We agreed and got off. However, my brother, Danny, Sean, and I somehow managed to piss off the drivers and were left with no ride. The four of us put on our massive backpacks and began walking aimlessly. After a good 20 minutes, we called over a tuk-tuk on the road and bargained an exceptional price to drop all of us off at our appropriate accommodations. We got to our hostel, which was more of a luxury hotel at the price of a hostel, and settled down. The next day was Angkor Wat, so we called it an early night. 2 days after our arrival in Cambodia, we met up with Danny and Sean again and went to a snooker bar for a couple games of pool before hitting up Pub Street. We told each other about what we saw in Angkor Wat and shared pictures. When we were returning to our hostel that night, we were offered cocaine, boom boom, still not entirely sure as to what that is, and a lady was offered to my brother Danny and Sean. However, that night, we planned to grab a taxi from Siem Reap, Cambodia, to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, the capital. In Phnom Penh, we stayed at OK Guest House, which ended up being my favorite hostel out of all we stayed at. Even though we had to climb 4 sets of stairs to get to our room, because they don't believe in elevators or something in Cambodia. In the lobby, there was an elephant holding a you-know in its left paw. The staff was hilarious, especially one guy. There was a boxing match on the TV, and he pointed to himself saying, "I go fight soon." Though I was thoroughly weirded out and confused, I got the hang of his jokes. In Phnom Penh, we applied for our Vietnam visas. We were told it'd take an entire day, so we were essentially forced to spend another day in Phnom Penh, which was not entirely our plan. However, we went with the flow, and that was one of my favorite days from this trip. We went to the killing fields, rode more tuk-tuks, looked at more ancient temples. By this time, they were starting to all resemble each other, got harassed by salespeople, saw pigs strapped to the backs of motorcycles, and ate more delicious food. Oh, and we also saw a run-over kitten in the middle of the road. That night was the night we went to VIP Bar, because that was the only bar with a pool table. We entered, only to be greeted by a good 20 prostitutes. It was my first time encountering prostitutes, but I quickly learned that they're rather nice people. We walked around more, wandering up and down alleys, getting massages, eating and playing pool until midnight, which was when our night bus to Vietnam was. Again, it wasn't a luxury night bus. There were mosquitoes buzzing in our ears. The only blanket provided was a small fleece rag that smelled as though they were never washed. There wasn't any room to put your stuff, including your shoes or your legs, and the seats were leaned back at the most awkward angle. My brother and I, being sleep masters, were able to fall asleep, all inconveniences aside. Danny and Sean, however, tossed and turned all night. We stopped at a restaurant about an hour away from the Cambodian and Vietnamese border at about 6 in the morning. The night bus driver advised us to grab something to eat, even though the kitchen was clearly very dirty and unhygienic. The four of us, being risk-takers, all ordered breakfast. After a quick stop in the bathroom, a squat toilet of course, we hopped back on the bus to travel to the Cambodian and Vietnamese border. We passed through easily. The night bus dropped us off quite literally in the middle of the road. Used to this, we got our backpacks and hailed a taxi. The path to our hostel was an alley, the type of alley children are advised to not go into. But when we got there, everything turned out fine, and we were off to explore Vietnam. More street food and a legion of motorcycles. We went to the Cu Chi tunnels and had the best time, swiftly maneuvering through the narrow passages. Soon, it was our last day in Vietnam, and our last day with Danny and Sean. We caught an early flight to Bangkok from Ho Chi Minh City, or Saigon, and after a day in Bangkok, we were off back to Korea. More than the things we saw, spending time with people and getting to know them made the experience as great as it was. Since Danny was British and Sean Canadian, we never got tired of taking a piss at each other's accents. Sean, my brother, and I would do our best British accents, while Danny did his best American one, which came out as more of a southern drawl than anything. On this trip, I met the funniest, coolest people and saw things that absolutely blew my mind away, like the dinosaurs. It was a summer to remember for a lifetime. Adrian's. Just when everyone thought grade school was over, cafeteria-style dining is making a comeback at Adrian's Pizza Bar, outside the charming bistro on Stone Street between Coenties Alley and William Street. Rows and rows of long tables are lined up neatly with benches attached under them. The cliques of traders, bankers, secretaries, and consultants sit together in their respective Wall Street companies, and just like grade school, pizza is still the most popular order on the menu. The only thing that's missing is the yellow plastic trays, milk cartons, and soggy green beans. According to Menu Pages, an online restaurant guide, there are 569 registered pizza restaurants in Manhattan. Nevertheless, Adrian's Pizza Bar has no trouble distinguishing itself from the marinara-slathered masses. Inspired by DeFara Pizzeria in Brooklyn and King Umberto's on Long Island, Adrian's veers from traditional round pizzas and ventures into the mystifying world of squares. Adrian summons the Sicilian pizza gods to resurrect this four-cornered, thin-crusted perfection as it debatably surpasses its predecessors. All the pizzas are delicious, but the white pizza is my favorite, Nellie Hernandez, 29, says, who eats at Adrian's weekly on her lunch breaks. It's hot, melts in your mouth, not too doughy, and the perfect amount of cheese. Also with a crisp crust and fresh tomato sauce, Adrian's Pizza has a reputation of tasting flavorful and zesty. The flavor is spicy with a tang, David McDermott, 29, says as he takes a bite of his pepperoni and cheese slice. Adrian's Pizza Bar, a hidden gem in the shadow of Wall Street grandeur, is tough to find among the downtown skyscrapers. Dozens of pizza joints found along the way tempt harried business people from discovering Adrian's. Yet customers instinctively seem to know not to settle for second best. All the other pizza places around are greasy, Sarah Hager, 25, says, who works on Rector Street. Adrian's actually uses good ingredients. It's better quality, more expensive. Needless to say, the sight of businesswomen trying to maneuver their way over cobblestones on heels simply to eat pizza is slightly humorous. The restaurant is mostly filled with aggressive Wall Street types, busboy John Contreras, 20, says. Bartender Mike Conforti, 25, agrees, and says that the line of people is always out the door. It is like the stock exchange is going on in here, he said. Adrian's location on Stone Street has a long history preceding its newly made mark on New York City's pizza scene. Not only does the history of Stone Street extend further back than the opening of Adrian's Pizza Bar, but the rest of New York City as well. Stone Street is the oldest paved road in New York City, according to the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. Stone Street got its name in 1656. Historian Hope Cook wrote in her book, Seeing New York. It was something of a boast, as it was the town's first road to get paving. However, Stone Street has undergone several name changes along the way. When the Dutch West India Company first sold the area to European property owners in the 1640s, the street was originally called High Street. The street was moved to connect with Browser Street a few years later and was given the name Stone Street. It was placed under British control in the late 18th century, and the street was briefly called Duke Street in honor of the Duke of York. A group of politically minded New Yorkers finally renamed it Stone Street in 1794 in order to preserve its historical significance. The gabled houses on Stone Street reflect the Dutch merchants' attempts to replicate the houses in which they lived in Holland. The two neat rows of low-rise brick buildings contained various maritime businesses, such as sailmakers and supply warehouses. Its location near the waterfront made Stone Street the bustling center for maritime trade and commerce throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. The maritime industry gradually shifted from the lower East River to the Hudson River at the turn of the 19th century, and the once vibrant Stone Street district experienced a slow demise. The buildings began to crumble, and Stone Street simply became a shadow of its past. Throughout the 20th century, Stone Street was cast aside as an insignificant remnant of New York history. For the longest time, it was just a blocked-off dead end, just a back alley where people dumped their garbage, Conforti says. The historic area reinvented itself only recently, due to restaurateur Harry Polakakos, who has taken the downtown restaurant scene by storm. Over the last 10 years, he has received the strong backing of the Downtown Alliance to renovate Stone Street into a vibrant gathering place of bars and restaurants. The city installed a new street bed lined with cobblestones that duplicated its original paving and old-style lighting fixtures throughout the district. Polakakos opened Bayards, Ulysses, Financier, Patisserie, and Harry's, covering the broad assortment of dining possibilities. Named after his late wife, Adrian's Pizza Bar was the last piece in completing Harry Polakakos' vision of a revived Stone Street when it opened in May 2005. Open 12 hours a day, Adrian's Pizza Bar accommodates a wide range of customers. After serving the business crowd on weekdays, Adrian's transforms into a sophisticated pizza and wine lounge on weeknights. Unnoticed details of the restaurant unexpectedly come to view. The dim lighting subtly accentuates the chandeliers and candlelit tables, while the contemporary furnishings and wood accents are a luxurious touch to the overall atmosphere. On weekends, Adrian's is converted into a family restaurant. According to Conforti, Thursday nights are the busiest. Unlike every other restaurant in New York City, it actually slows down on weekends, he says. Conforti says the bustling weekday environment of Adrian's is a welcome change from his previous job at the Soho Bar HQ. Nonetheless, Stone Street is still a relaxed alternative to a rowdy night out. There's not much else open around here, Paul Hoffman says, a 22-year-old who regularly orders takeout from Adrian's. Although it claims to deliver, Adrian's doesn't seem too eager to oblige on busy nights. When asked to deliver to Lafayette Street and White Street, a location less than a mile away, the hostess over the phone replies in a haughty tone, "We are right near South Street Seaport. You know where that is? That is really far." Although it is later revealed that Adrian's only delivers to the surrounding area of South Street Seaport, Hoffman and other Seaport residents say delivery is typically slow anyways. It may be for the best. The cool, hip atmosphere of the restaurant is a big part of the dining experience, just as Polakakis intended it to be. For instance, Adrian's is one of the very few pizza joints that serves wine and mixed alcoholic drinks along with its pizza. The bar is always open and packed, even during the day, says Conforti. The most popular mixed drink is a Nutellatini, a combination of Nutella, vanilla vodka, and Frangelica, heated on an espresso machine. Adam Coomber, 31, visiting from London, takes his time to finish his third beer before paying for his sausage and pepper pizza. "I'm staying just around the corner," he says. "I also take a seat at the bar, so I can begin my own Adrian's experience. I order a margarita pizza, classic, but difficult to execute well. I consider ordering a Nutellatini as well until I realize that the $10 cocktail costs just as much as the pizza itself. Sipping my ice water instead, I wait for my pizza to arrive. The pizza looks appetizing, although I am surprised at how little cheese is on the pizza. However, I'm distracted by the fresh basil leaves and layer of diced San Marzano tomatoes. I begin to pick up a slice when I notice the silverware arranged neatly next to my plate. Discreetly putting down the pizza, I pick up the fork and knife instead. I secretly think how grown-up this pizza looks and tastes in comparison to the greasy pizza that I am typically used to. The crust is so thin and crisp it resembles a baked tortilla. The bottom is partially charred, but I get the feeling that it was cooked that way on purpose to capture the brick oven taste. The other flavors are so delicate and delectable that I do not feel guilty eating the entire pizza on my own. At around midnight, the flames of the wood brick oven slowly die out. Contreras, along with the other busboys, folds the cafeteria tables outside. A tall, attractive couple are the last customers to walk out of Adrian's for the night. Tipsy and giggling, the man holds her hand as she navigates her way through the cobblestones. His doting gesture and her breezy charm are reminiscent of a classic 1950s film. "Have a good night," Contreras calls out to them. His voice becomes lost in the still air of Stone Street. Bicycles. Approximately 120,000 New Yorkers ride their bikes daily, according to Transportation Alternatives, a group that advocates safe, non-automobile transportation. In a metropolis of 8 million people, that means that bikers in New York City compete with speeding taxis, oversized trucks, and swarms of pedestrians who seem to take their right-of-way very seriously. It's no wonder that bike safety is something that continues to attract the attention and concern of city officials and the growing bike community, whether they work for a delivery service, commute to work, or ride leisurely. NYU sophomore Andrew Jarris rolls up his pant leg to reveal a 2-inch gash on his right calf. "I tried to bike home from Kmart while holding a 5-foot rug, and I fell on my bike chain ring," Jarris said sheepishly. Not that this is his first bicycle accident in the last 2 years. There was the time he flew over his handlebars as the truck in front of him stopped abruptly, followed by the time he rolled onto the hood of a Ford Taurus before it unlawfully sped off. And his biking history would not be complete without recounting the incident from this last summer, which involved the 14th and Broadway stoplight, an old lady, an ambulance, and 2 squad cars. However, Jarris's accidents cannot be blamed entirely on the unpredictable terrain of the city. Fully aware that bicycles are subject to the same traffic rules as cars, Jarrus said he is unfazed by things such as stoplights and traffic signs. "I wouldn't call myself a reckless biker. I would consider myself to be more of an aggressive biker," Jarrus said. "Weaving through traffic and going faster than the cars. It's a feeling of power because you feel like you are above the traffic, above the law almost," Jarrus said. Although Jarrus has ridden away from his bike accidents without any serious physical harm or criminal charges, all New York bikers are not as lucky. According to the New York Times, there were 12 bicycle-related deaths in 2005. Throughout the city, commemorative white bicycles are placed at the numerous sites of bicycle fatalities. Although the exact number is uncertain, bike memorials are scattered around New York City, including several along the West Side Highway and Manhattan tunnels. The bike at 9th Avenue and 29th Street is the newest addition to the growing number of white bicycles seen around the city. Darren Lewis, 20-year-old bike messenger for Urban Express, was killed late August when he collided with a flatbed truck as it turned into his path. His death marked the 7th fatal bicycle accident of New York City just this year. Liz Nelson, an art handler for Crozier Arts, said the close bicycle community in New York personally maintains these commemorative bikes. "New York City has a huge bike culture, and we all look out for each other," said Nelson, who commutes from Brooklyn to Chelsea every day. Lewis's death brought forth increased concern for the city's safety measures for bicycles. New York City's growing population needs streets with traffic-protected bike paths, said Noah Budnick, Deputy Manager of Transportation Alternatives, in an August press release. "Protected space improves visibility and helps ensure that all drivers see cyclists. This will prevent bicyclist fatalities and crashes." The city is currently working on a bicycle master plan to build additional bike lanes and other safety precautions for bikes throughout the city. "It made me feel pleased to know that this was made into such a big deal, and people know about it," Jarrus said. David Floyd, a bike messenger for Urban Express, said Lewis's death only made small ripples in the larger scheme of the bike messenger business. "We have to keep doing what we're doing. There is no use in slowing down," Floyd said. Urban Express manager Augustin Moran said that stricter citywide rules may actually be working detrimentally for messengers. "The city is making it harder for bikers to work by slapping down tickets," Moran said. "Cars should be a bigger concern." Moran said courier services in New York are always in high demand. "Every building in New York is a virtual stop, so the volume is large," Moran said. Although Urban Express also offers truck and foot deliveries, Moran said bicycles are still the most effective means of deliveries. "A biker is faster than a walker and more convenient than a vehicle because he doesn't have to sit in traffic or find a place to park," Moran said. Floyd, who has worked as a bike messenger for the last 10 years, said Urban Express messengers are paid on commission. "There's definitely a strong incentive to complete as many jobs as possible," Floyd said. Although messengers are pushed to make deliveries quickly and efficiently, Moran said the risk of an accident prevents messengers from riding recklessly. "When you're a bike messenger, you definitely don't want to break something and put yourself out of commission for several months," Moran said. "A job is a job. It's your life." Nevertheless, the bike community seeks to come together for reasons outside of necessity and tragedy. In addition to commemorative bikes, hundreds of New Yorkers take time out every last Friday of each month to participate in New York City's largest, leaderless, open-to-all ride called Critical Mass. Critical Mass is a monthly celebration of bicycles and other non-polluting means of transportation, exercising their right to the road. Although it is not referred to as a demonstration, the riders of Critical Mass come out for various reasons, such as promoting bicycle awareness and advocating alternative transportation. The large amount of police regulation draws more peripheral attention. "We're not blocking traffic, we are traffic," states the Critical Mass slogan. Starting points in New York City are Union Square North, Washington Square Park, Tompkins Square Park, Madison Square Park, and Grand Army Plaza in Brooklyn. You always seem to pass the same people, and they talk to you, and it's a nice way to connect through something good for the city and the environment, Nelson said. Plus, I'm not buying gas and supporting a capitalist economy that starts wars. Diana Gutierrez and Rani Housney, seniors at City College of New York, cited similar reasons for participating in critical mass and commuting to school every day. I would much rather ride my bike every day than spend 45 minutes sitting next to some sweaty old man on the subway, Gutierrez said. Housney said he needed the exercise, even though he sometimes got lazy and took the subway. Housney and Gutierrez characterized other bicyclists to be interesting, but a little crazy. Safety seems to be the underlying concern for commuters. We were killed almost 5 times just getting here to Union Square because of cars trying to make the light, Gutierrez said. Nelson echoed similar sentiments. Cars will just ride right into bike lanes as they turn, Nelson said, referring to what bicyclists know as right hooks. However, they said critical mass is mostly made up of bicycle commuters. There are usually very few bike messengers, Housney said. They're tired. They're over it. Floyd confirmed Housney's observation. I don't have the time to be clogging up lanes, Floyd said early Friday morning before leaving for his first delivery of the day. Dodgers and Divorce, the Great American Pastimes. Introduction. Although 75 to 80% of divorce cases are resolved through mediation, not all divorces are created equally. Frank and Jamie McCourt's 30-year marriage involved typical private family matters of private parties. However, their divorce is coupled with the ownership of the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team and over $1 billion in assets. Even though their divorce litigation is still ongoing, their most recent mediation session poses some interesting questions. In this paper, I will explore the various mediation techniques used in the McCourt's divorce mediation and suggest possible changes that could have made the mediation more effective. Part 1 will provide the relevant facts of the McCourt's divorce case, and Part 2 will discuss the stakeholders in the divorce. Part 3 is an analysis of the mediation process based on available facts and reasonable inferences, and Part 4 will address the unknown aspects of the mediation process. Part 4 will present a hypothetical mediation that could have potentially reached more favorable outcomes for both parties. Finally, Part 5 will discuss the broader critique of the McCourt's mediation and whether this case was properly placed in mediation. Facts of the case. In 2004, Boston real estate developer Frank McCourt bought the LA Dodgers from News Corp for $430 million. He became the owner and chairman of the Dodgers, while his wife Jamie McCourt became the vice chairman, CEO, and president. On October 23, 2009, the day after the LA Dodgers season ended, McCourt fired his wife as the team's chief executive officer. Shortly after, she filed for divorce. They had been married for 30 years. The main issue of contention is a 2004 postnuptial marital property agreement that grants Frank ownership of the Dodgers and their 7 properties to Jamie. 2 versions of the property agreement exist, one that gives sole ownership of the Dodgers to Frank, and one that gives co-ownership to Jamie and Frank. Larry Silverstein, the Bingham McCutcheon attorney who drafted the agreement, testified that he simply corrected an innocent mistake by changing the word exclusive to inclusive after the McCourts had signed the documents. Silverstein failed to notify either party. Frank's attorney argues that Jamie had wanted their assets separated to protect herself from Frank's highly leveraged business deals. In contrast, Jamie testified that the Dodgers were a family purchase and she was a co-owner of the team. If the agreement is upheld, Frank would have sole ownership of the Dodgers. If the agreement is invalidated, California's community property law will apply, splitting the team in half and being sold. The stakeholders. This divorce has received particular media attention because of the stakeholders, the Dodgers team, and its fans. Even before news of the divorce broke, the McCourts were provided with a lukewarm reception into the Dodgers community. While the Dodgers represented stable, sentimental, old-fashioned, and old Hollywood to their fans, the McCourts were outsiders, dumping into a toxic fishbowl, usually reserved for the town's pop stars and B-list actors. It was unhelpful that the purchase of the Dodgers was Frank's fourth choice. Although the McCourts got the Dodgers to the playoffs 4 times in their 6-year tenure and club attendance has broken records, public perception has barely budged. The public nature of the McCourts' divorce has only exacerbated the animosity towards them. Court filings revealed how the McCourts used the Dodgers as a multi-million-dollar ATM while slashing the Dodgers' payroll by nearly $30 million and borrowing $140 million against future ticket sales. Other court documents show that 2 of the McCourt sons were put on the team payroll for $600,000 per year without actually working. The McCourts paid themselves a combined $108 million in 6 years without paying income taxes, had a private jet, regularly ordered pricey floral arrangements, and dined at expensive restaurants. Sports Illustrated noted, McCourt versus McCourt is a custody dispute. Like so many cases on the courthouse's second floor, only the Dodgers are the child in the middle, and no one with the child's best interests in mind wants either side to prevail. With a divorce that has already been prolonged for a year and expected to continue, the McCourts are doing a disservice to the Dodgers, its fans, and themselves. The actual mediation. Because the McCourts' mediation, like most mediation, is confidential, this process analysis will only deal with publicly available facts and reasonable inferences. Over the past year, the McCourts have had several rounds of unsuccessful negotiations with and without mediators. The McCourts' last mediation was conducted by Judge Peter Lichtman. On November 19, mediator Lichtman met in separate closed sessions with each McCourt and their attorneys to provide a mediation proposal, and until the end of November to accept or reject the proposal. Because Jamie rejected the proposal, Superior Court Judge Scott Gordon will make a ruling on the validity of the marital agreement in January 2011, and the divorce litigation will continue potentially for several more years. Because Frank and Jamie were married for 30 years with 4 sons, they were well positioned for a transformative mediation. The explosive clash of their business and personal relations suggests that forgiveness and healing were necessary in order to negotiate their differences and come up with a collaborative solution. Both parties displayed strong animosity towards each other, but have not been given an opportunity to acknowledge their emotions in a constructive manner. Focusing on the monetary figures of spousal support is an obvious starting point, but it is only hitting the tip of the iceberg of conflict. Like in the Jams movie, the lawyers immediately converted the value of the dispute into monetary numbers. Because there is so much money at stake in this case, the lawyers went directly to the financial matters, even though the clients were struggling with the qualitative aspects of their divorce. Mediation has been based on the premise that Frank will keep control of the Dodgers, and he would pay Jamie to surrender any claim to the team. This basis seems to address the interests and identity of Frank, delving deeper down the iceberg of conflict. His deep love of baseball can be traced back to his grandfather, who was a part owner of the Atlanta Braves. Frank made bids for 3 other baseball teams prior to acquiring the LA Dodgers. He has also expressed an interest in passing the Dodgers to his sons in the future. Frank's clear BATNA was retaining ownership of the Dodgers. Nevertheless, Jamie's own iceberg of conflict has not been addressed by the mediator or the opposing party in the mediation process. In a court filing, Jamie claimed her firing was Frank's plot to humiliate and ostracize her. She felt the same way about Frank's accusations of infidelity. After her first court appearance, she sighed, "It's sad, right? It's a marriage of 30 years. There is no clear BATNA presented for Jamie's case. After requesting $488,000 of monthly spousal support, she nearly doubled the amount to $988,845 in February 2010. Although she claimed it was because of Frank's misrepresentation of his finances, it appears emotional and psychological barriers were put in place. Therefore, it was not surprising that Jamie rejected Judge Lichtman's final mediation proposal. Jamie is unable to let go because she likely feels that she has been wronged by Frank in their 30-year marriage. Due to the prolonged turmoil in her marriage, Jamie may have become addicted to the problem. Although the media has suggested that the parties' impasse is caused by Jamie's superior legal position regarding the postnuptial agreement, the inability to address Jamie's iceberg of conflict appears to be the greater source of impasse. Furthermore, Jamie's team of 4 lawyers also poses a higher risk of deferred responsibility. Several problems with this mediation process are apparent. First of all, a mediator presented his own settlement proposal with an imposed deadline, violating the model standards of practice for family and divorce mediation. Under Standard 1, family mediation is based on the principle of self-determination by the participants. A mediator is not permitted to coerce participants to settle or act as a judge or arbitrator. Mediator Lichtman's approach is comparable to Richard Holbrooke's approach in Bosnia-Herzegovina. He presented a complete package and tried to ram it through by intensive negotiation and forceful deadline. Although Holbrooke's mediation was in an international context and Lichtman's mediation was in a divorce context, both adopted an approach of whatever it takes to force a deal. Lichtman's ultimatum of accept this proposal or be subject to the judge's ruling was inherently coercive. Mediators often take a mediation approach that is consistent with their personalities. In this case, it is possible that not only did Lichtman allow his judge role to unduly influence his mediator role, but that Lichtman was matching the aggressive personalities of both parties and their counsel in order to assert his authority. Separate caucus sessions are a productive technique in mediation for parties to help parties to evaluate the legal positions. However, news reports indicate that both Frank and Jamie were never in the same room during mediation. Because the parties are unable to communicate directly with each other, the mediator cannot take a facilitative position to foster honest and open communication between the parties. After 30 years of marriage, negative intimacy likely pervaded their relationship, and they were unable to let go. The mediator did not attempt a transformative mediation because the McCourt's relationship appeared irreparable. However, he had a responsibility to go into deeper levels of honesty. The mediator foreclosed all opportunities for growth, learning, and improved understanding by narrowing the issue of the appropriate amount of spousal support. Both parties exerted their power by hiring expensive celebrity divorce lawyers and taking scorched earth litigation tactics. Frank brought 6 lawyers, while Jamie brought 5 lawyers. Attorneys' fees for the case are estimated to be about $20 million. One of Frank's lawyers, Steve Sussman, has been described as a litigation assault weapon, and the other lawyers have represented celebrities in their respective divorces. Such powerful legal personalities are likely to overshadow the clients. Because both teams of lawyers had used extremely adversarial tactics in court, it seems unlikely that the lawyers switched to a collaborative approach. As mentioned before, both parties are vulnerable to deferred responsibility if they allow the lawyers to control the litigation. Furthermore, Frank's lawyers violated Lichtman's confidentiality agreement by releasing a public statement about the mediation impasse and revealing Jamie's rejection of the settlement proposal. Frank's lawyers claimed Frank was doing the responsible thing for his family, the Dodgers organization, and the entire community, while Jamie was allowing this matter to drag on further. The actions of Frank's lawyers show an inherent lack of respect for the mediation process. They exploited the mediation for a public relations opportunity. It is yet to be determined whether Frank's lawyers will receive a sanction for violating mediation confidentiality. Finally, the firm Bingham McCutcheon was permitted to participate in mediation for the McCourt divorce due to its attorney's unethical conduct in correcting the marital property agreement without the parties' consent. Bingham would be an additional source of money to narrow the 9-figure gap in the settlement amount. From an efficiency standpoint, it is better for Bingham McCutcheon to provide money within the settlement now and avoid an even costlier legal malpractice claim later. Because Bingham McCutcheon is an outside party, the court would not have the ability to order Bingham McCutcheon to pay damages to either Frank or Jamie McCourt in a divorce case. Mediation provides the flexibility to include additional financial sources for Jamie's spousal support. Law professor Michael Moffat would argue that mediation is a more inclusive answer than litigation by allowing Bingham McCutcheon to be at the table. However, this may also foreclose the opportunity for the McCourts to exercise their legal rights against Bingham McCutcheon. Legal malpractice claims were established in order to protect the general public from sloppy and unethical legal practices. Allowing Bingham McCutcheon to offer money instead of taking legal responsibility may implicitly condone the underlying conduct. Missing pieces of the process. As previously mentioned, the whole picture of the mediation process is unavailable due to confidentiality. This section briefly addresses the elements of the mediation that would be helpful to a complete analysis. There is little information about Lichtman's preparation for the mediation process. Did he read all of the court filings? Did he research the McCourts' personal biographies? Why did he decide to have separate caucus sessions instead of a joint session? Once the parties arrived, Lichtman's specific ground rules, other than confidentiality and terms of agreement to mediate, are unknown. Whether the good faith requirement was satisfied by both parties is unclear. Although good faith does not require a party to reach a settlement, it does require each party to look towards settlement. Despite multiple mediation sessions during the past year, the aggressive litigation tactics in between sessions appeared to deteriorate the McCourts' relationship even further. Rather than bringing them closer to settlement, the progression of time made the possibility of settlement even more remote. Based on Lichtman's unilateral proposal and strict deadline, it appears that the proposed settlement was not a collaborative solution. However, it is possible that Lichtman tried to incorporate creative and integrative components into the agreement. It would be interesting to know whether Lichtman suggested expanding the pie, non-specific compensation, log rolling, cost-cutting, bridging, or similar techniques. However, this would be extremely difficult to accomplish if the parties are not offering possible new options and discussing their prioritized interests with each other. Another integral aspect of this mediation analysis is how the mediation process acknowledged high emotions. Did Lichtman engage in these emotions? Were they discussed at all? Did the parties tell their stories, or did the lawyers? How did the lawyers deal with the parties' emotions? When Jamie stated her exorbitant spousal payment demand, did Lichtman ask why? Because the two parties were separated the entire time, Frank and Jamie were not given an opportunity to tell each other their versions of the story or confront each other regarding their feelings. Moreover, there is no information about the parties' conduct during the mediation session. It would be interesting to identify Frank and Jamie's direct participation in the mediation discussions. It is possible that the lawyers controlled the mediation, thus minimizing the parties' voices. Finally, there is no information on the extent of Bingham McCutcheon's actual involvement in the mediation. Although it was revealed that Bingham McCutcheon was offering money for Jamie's spousal payment, it was not revealed whether the firm's representatives participated in the caucus sessions or whether the settlement proposal included a covenant not to sue for legal malpractice. The hypothetical mediation. Due to the unsuccessful outcome of the McCourts' actual mediation with Judge Lichtman, I am proposing a hypothetical mediation that could have potentially resulted in better results for both parties. First of all, an extended, good faith mediation should have taken place before any litigation. Because the adverse litigation tactics destroyed any civility left between the couple, Lichtman's mediation was too little, too late. Next, I would have locked all the lawyers out of the room, with the parties' informed consent, of course. Lawyers are typically only needed for mediation when there is an imbalance of power. Since both Frank and Jamie are sophisticated business people, there is low risk of injustice resulting from power inequality. The lawyers could be included in mediation talks only when strictly legal questions need to be answered. Although third parties could participate, Frank and Jamie would be the main focus of the mediation. Second, I would have structured the mediation so that the division of financial assets would be at the end point rather than the starting point of the mediation process. Rather than Lichtman's narrow, evaluative approach, the mediator would begin with a broad, facilitative approach initially and funnel into a narrower, more evaluative approach closer to the point of a settlement agreement. I would divide the mediation into two distinct sections, their personal relationship and their business relationship. Although they are interrelated to a certain extent, it appears that the problems in their personal relationship seeped into their business relationship. By discussing the two aspects of their lives separately, the McCourts could distinguish their past personal problems from their future business decisions in order to determine the best interests of the Dodgers. In the personal relationship step of the mediation, a mediator with a psychology background would help the couple understand their marriage problems. Although talking about the problems accumulated from a 30-year marriage may take a considerable amount of time, resolving emotional issues between the parties would pave the way for rational solutions for business and financial matters and the final divorce agreement. The mediator should go deeper down the iceberg of conflict for both parties, from the issues to emotion to personality to interests and ultimately to identity. If infidelity was involved in their marriage, as both parties alleged in their court filings, this would be an opportunity for the parties to discuss it. Rather than using infidelity as a litigation weapon to damage the other party's credibility in court, the parties could use their past behavior to understand the implications on the icebergs of conflict. Only after the parties come to a calm understanding of their personal disputes, the mediator could move on to business and financial disputes. Once the parties let go of their resentment, it will be much easier to discuss business matters in a rational, calculated manner. Because Frank and Jamie worked as business partners, they should be able to jointly determine the best interests of the Dodgers. Although Frank may deny that Jamie has any authority to manage the Dodgers, the mediator would remind Frank that he had once trusted her enough to delegate some managerial authority to her. Actual mediation discussions were based on the assumption that Frank would keep control of the Dodgers. However, this option does not acknowledge Jamie's BATNA. She may consider giving up Dodgers ownership to be losing. The mediator should discuss with Jamie in a private caucus session whether her BATNA includes continued involvement with the Dodgers. Under a mediator's facilitative broad approach, Jamie will be able to define her underlying interests. Although the Major League Baseball League does not allow equal co-owners, they could discuss a possible 51-49% ownership division. Jamie may be able to continue working and receiving perks from the Dodgers enterprise in a way that does not require interaction with Frank. However, if Jamie is not interested in the Dodgers, she should concede how much baseball means to Frank and allow him to continue as the sole owner of the team. Hopefully, by this point in the mediation, Jamie is no longer out to hurt Frank by taking his team away. Together, Jamie and Frank can generate and assess proposals that are designed to accommodate both their interests in the team. The mediator could also choose to take a more evaluative approach by providing predictions, assessments, and recommendations about the parties' proposals. Discussions on the spousal payment should be where the lawyers would get involved, and the mediator would take an evaluative narrow approach. This may require discovery of Frank's financial records and Jamie's living expenses. However, the mediator should keep personal matters, such as infidelity and work alliances, out of the equation. In a closed mediation, there would be no public scorn of their extravagant lifestyles, so the final determination would stand on the strengths and weaknesses of their legal positions and the likely outcome at trial. As a final step, the mediator could direct the McCourts to consider their public image and determine how they can improve it. It is unlikely that either party would want to make their divorce so public or reveal their over-the-top spending habits to the unforgiving media. The McCourts may come up with creative ways to demonstrate to the Dodgers community their dedication to the team despite the divorce. Like any typical divorce, the McCourts can explain to their child, "This doesn't mean we don't love you anymore." By using an ongoing cycle of broad, narrow, facilitative, evaluative approaches in the mediation session, the mediator is more likely to reach a mediation settlement. The mediator should focus on the individual's underlying interests rather than forcing a settlement with a tightly imposed deadline. The McCourts will find greater satisfaction with the outcome because it represents their personal preferences. Although it may be too late for the McCourts, my proposed mediation framework could be applied to other couples whose divorce implicates both personal and business matters. Mediation or litigation. Although the media and publicity surrounding high-profile court cases is often viewed as a nuisance, courts have generally held a First Amendment right of access. Taking an open court proceeding and moving it behind closed doors prohibits public's right without providing any compelling governmental interests. Although it permits Larry Silverman and Bingham McCutcheon from avoiding a legal malpractice suit, this advantage does not serve the benefit of the members of the public who utilize legal services or the integrity and reputation of the legal profession as a whole. The analysis of this case shows that mediation may not be appropriate when the outcome has a greater effect on a community. Although the McCourts case may not be as historically significant as Brown versus Board of Education, Owen Fisk could use this case to argue against settlement. Parties may view mediation as just another phase in the lawsuit, rather than a means to an end. On the other hand, mediation has been a secretive process that has concealed the case from public discussion. Without litigation, it would have never come to public light that Larry Silverstein engaged in unethical practices by changing the wording of a contractually binding agreement without the parties' consent. Even if the fact came out during mediation, confidentiality provisions would have forbidden either McCourt to bring a legal malpractice claim or give notice to a legal ethics committee. Silverstein and his law firm would avoid both legal sanctions and negative publicity. This would result in an overall detriment to the legal profession. Future clients would be vulnerable to similarly questionable legal agreements. Such unethical practices would taint the reputation of lawyers' professionalism. Without litigation, the public would not have discovered the lurid details of the McCourts' extravagant lifestyles at the detriment of the Dodgers' enterprise. As a matter of great community interest, Dodgers fans have been allowed to spark public discussion on how a baseball team should be run and the public to reaffirm the need for ethical behavior when it comes to lawyers. Although mediation allowed Bingham McCutcheon to come to the table, litigation has allowed the Dodgers community to come to the table. Ultimately, the numerous mediation sessions increase the agency costs of the divorce rather than reduce them. According to Moffat, agents in practice do not always understand their priorities and underlying interests, and they have incentives that are sometimes at odds with the client's interests. It is unclear whether the lawyers have considered outside interests, such as the reputational damage to their clients, the interests of the Dodgers team, and the overall integrity of the legal profession. Nevertheless, mediation had the potential for success in Frank and Jamie McCourt's divorce. The difficulty of the divorce has been exponentially increased by public exposure. Several other high-profile divorces, such as golf player Tiger Woods and Boston Red Sox owner John Henry, have been able to quickly settle their divorces outside of the courts with sealed settlement agreements, causing the gossip media to lose interest quickly. Although a large sum of money is involved in this case, the internal conflicts of the divorce should have been resolved alongside the external division of the assets. Their attempts of mediation were unsuccessful for several reasons. First, the mediator's narrow, evaluative orientation was non-collaborative and coercive. He did not allow the parties to interact with each other and produced his own proposal with a strict deadline. Ultimately, his optional proposal offered no more benefits than a typical court ruling. Second, the process included too many lawyers. The lawyers overpowered the parties' own voices and heightened the risk of deferred responsibility. Although there was no power imbalance based on the quantity and quality of the lawyers, there was an obvious power struggle between the parties that the mediator failed to address. In my opinion, the mediation could have better served the clients if he integrated a broad, facilitative orientation rather than focusing on a narrow, evaluative orientation. As discussed in our mediation debate, there is no verified process for weeding out the significant cases from the trivial cases to determine whether settlement or litigation is the best option. The McCourt's case involves both. It is significant because of the affected Dodgers community, but it is trivial because it deals with the private relationship between a wife and a husband. Because this final mediation took place a year after litigation began, the damaged relationship between the parties had become virtually irreparable. Conclusion: divorce cases make up a substantial portion of mediation cases because they generally involve the private interests of private parties. However, the McCourt's divorce involves enough financial assets and properties to resemble a complex commercial transaction. More importantly, the McCourt's divorce case is entrenched in the future of the Dodgers, their fans, and the legal profession. From my evaluation of the available facts, the mediation of the McCourt's divorce case was not well executed. Judge Gordon's last-ditch attempt to facilitate settlement prior to his ruling and mediator Lichtman's coercive, urgent approach to the mediation did not serve either party's identifiable interests. They were both searching for a quick settlement rather than a transformative mediation. Because the McCourt's relationship had become so deteriorated, the deeper depths of the iceberg of conflict needed to be addressed before there could be any possibility of a settlement. Since Jamie's BATNA and her feelings towards Frank were never addressed, she had no interest in reaching a settlement. If several fundamental changes were made to the mediation, as proposed in my hypothetical mediation, both parties may have been able to reach a collaborative solution that served both their individual needs and interests. This would include a two-part process that separates their personal disputes from their business disputes, with a rotating cycle between narrow, broad, and facilitative evaluative approaches. The mediator would play the roles of therapist, communicator, business consultant, legal advisor, and PR director. As a whole, courts should not treat mediation as a cookie-cutter process that can be applied to every divorce case. Cases that relate to a public matter should not be sent to mediation without further reflection. Furthermore, the judge should consider whether the participation of wrongdoing third parties, such as Bingham McCutcheon, is against public policy. Although mediation provides an effective process for private parties to retain control of their disputes and come up with collaborative solutions tailored to their individual interests, it should only be used in cases where mediation's purposes will be fully served. Jailhouse Chalk. As a teenager in the Bronx, Crystal Kitchings told her older sister she had come up with a surgical procedure to permanently fix her painful ingrown toenail. Using a green disposable scalpel that her father, a nurse practitioner, had laying around the house, she proceeded to cut off a little piece of meat on the affected toe. Following that day, her sister never suffered from an ingrown toenail again. Crystal gave insulin shots, packed gauze in an open leg cyst, and took care of the assorted aches and pains of family and neighbors as she was growing up. Everyone glowingly exclaimed that Crystal had a certain quality about her that made people feel better. The entire neighborhood sensed she would end up becoming a talented doctor. But the first time Crystal wore mandated green scrubs, it wasn't in a hospital operating room. It was at Rikers Island, waiting to be sentenced on a first-degree manslaughter charge. At 23, Crystal experienced post-traumatic shock from a brutal experience that she is not still willing to talk about 11 years later. When she was taken to prison, she was issued a man's green button-down prison shirt 2 sizes too small, with the buttons popping open and her armpit skin burning off from the corrosive lye in the prison soap. The other inmates cackled in delight as they watched her struggle. Physically weak from also not eating, Crystal began to lose her mind, believing that someone was going to kill me. She went on to swallowing all her jewelry, including a gold cross necklace that got stuck in her chest. The X-ray looked like a horror scene from a religious movie. Crystal shudders. She was then sedated and put on suicide watch. "The pills make you forget everything," she says. "I couldn't even understand the calendar on the wall." It took Crystal almost 2 years to come to terms with her new reality. An unexpected mail envelope from her high school guidance counselor finally gave Crystal the support she needed to get her life back together. The manila envelope contained a copy of her stellar high school transcript and a yellow Post-it note that read, "This is the only Crystal that I know." It was the encouragement that Crystal needed to push forward with her life and continue on with her previously interrupted education, even behind bars. By then, Crystal had been transferred to Bedford Hills, a maximum security women's correctional facility where she would be serving 9 to 18 years. Coincidentally, Bedford Hills was, and still is, home of one of the most successful privately funded prison education programs in the nation. Once Crystal was accepted, she became one of the approximately 200 women at Bedford Hills who pursue their college educations on this not-so-traditional campus. Located in Westchester, New York, Bedford Hills claims its college program reduces recidivism rates by over 20% and creates a more manageable prison environment. According to a 2001 study conducted by the CUNY Graduate Center titled "Changing Minds: The Impact of College on a Maximum Security Prison," 7.7% of inmates who took college courses at Bedford Hills returned to prison after release, compared to 29.9% of non-participating inmates. The study calculated that reducing recidivism rates would save approximately $900,000 per 100 student prisoners over a 2-year period. After all, the cost to incarcerate an individual is $25,000 a year, while the cost of college classes is merely $2,500 a year. Our analysis doesn't even take into account the generational bridge, says Michelle Fine, CUNY Distinguished Professor of Psychology and author of the study. With the knowledge that the best predictor of children's education is their mother's education, there are other positive outcomes that will most likely transpire later on. Nonetheless, the immediate cost benefit is not difficult to figure out. Reducing reincarceration rates would ultimately save taxpayers money. You get a thick bang for your buck, adds Fine. The Bedford Hills College Program, BHCP, has been so successful that it has become a model for other college prison programs. The program was established not long after $12.5 million of federal funding was cut for prison education in 1994. Although prison programs were seeing success, the lack of public support derailed prison education completely. People were outraged that Pell Grants, need-based federal tuition assistance for low-income students, were being cut for law-abiding students when incarcerated individuals were receiving that same funding. It was a highly political decision, says Sarah Fromm, Director of Public Policy and Communications at Women's Prison Association. There was a tough-on-crime rhetoric that was going through the U.S. Congress. College prison programs were seen as a perk for undeserving individuals. Although it only made up 0.1% of the Pell Grant budget, it forced almost all 350 U.S. college prison programs to shut down and abruptly ended the education of 25,000 inmates. Soon after, BHCP cropped up to try and fill the gap, sustaining itself on private funds and a consortium of a dozen colleges. The amazing success of BHCP can be traced to the wealthy and nurturing Westchester community that it is located in. The program has become the celeb cause for actress and Bedford Hills resident Glenn Close and playwright Eve Ensler, along with contributors Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, and Camille Cosby, Bill Cosby's wife. BCHP now has an annual budget of $480,000, made up of foundation grants and several thousand private donors. An annual fundraising event called Net of Souls, featuring inmate writings performed by Close and Ensler, brought in $163,000 and became the central subject matter of the documentary, What I Want My Words to Do to You. But how far can $480,000 really stretch in terms of faculty, books, computers, and other materials for the program students? Although prison education in New York State today is far more innovative and prestigious than it has ever been before, the prison education system is further resembling the nationwide college system, available to the privileged few. Prisons only have the educational resources to accommodate a select group of inmates, thus leaving thousands of others, most without their GEDs, behind in the dust. Bedford Hills College program educates about 200 students at any given time, while BARD Initiative, another growing college prison program, only enrolls a little over 100 students in all 4 of its prisons put together. Crystal remembers the application process for the Bedford Hills College program being very rigorous. There was so much standardized testing, she laughs. Having spent a year and a half at Syracuse University and a semester at Pace University, Crystal certainly had an advantage. Most women arrive at Bedford without even a GED, and about 64% of the women in the program take pre-college classes to improve their basic writing and math skills. Once Crystal began BHCP classes, she found the work to be comparable to college work outside prison walls, and BHCP students are required to receive a B or higher in order to receive credit. The professors really didn't give us any special treatment, says Crystal. The only difference she found was the different educational resources. Since there was no internet and a limited library, the students would have to send their book requests to prison volunteers, who would then do their best to find relevant texts from outside libraries. And on top of all that, they still have to abide by prison regulations such as rec time, limitations, and the consequences of behavior violations. But Crystal, who came to Bedford Hills with little hope, left with an associate's degree in sociology and a renewed sense of possibility. In 2007, Crystal, now 34 years old, has traded in her green prison uniform for a camel-colored sweater, a black scarf, and ivy green corduroy pants that cover the tops of her charming black Mary Janes. She has medium-sized gold hoops, and her hair in a high bun is arranged in such a fashion that a stint of beauty school is needed to conceive it. As she sits at the desk of her new job, her poised appearance is not undercut by her infectious laugh that can be heard even from outside the office door. It's a wonder that the same laugh had reverberated from the prison walls of Bedford Hills not long ago. With the ties she established with BHCP professors and staff, Crystal now works as an office manager for the College Initiative, a re-entry program in New York City for former inmates who want to continue their higher education upon release. I do a little bit of everything, so the program runs smoothly, she explains. Office work, data entry, community outreach, speaking at events, things like that. The program provides a range of services promoting successful enrollment and completion of college degrees. A college prep curriculum helps address the academic gap between a GED obtained while incarcerated and college-level academics. Although the College Initiative has been located in Lehman College in the Bronx for a little over a year, the office already has a certain lived-in charm. Large wild plants cover a part of the windows. The front wall is covered with self-printed photographs of smiling faces, many of them wearing graduating caps with tassels positioned on the left side. An Asian-themed tapestry adorns the wall behind Crystal's makeshift cubicle. Books such as To Kill a Mockingbird, The Color Purple, and the autobiography of Malcolm X make up the pile of books on the back ledge. Since the College Initiative began in 2002, the number of students and amount of grant funding have been steadily increasing. Last year, the College Initiative moved from John Jay College of Criminal Justice to Lehman College in the Bronx in order to accommodate many of the 160 currently enrolled CI students who are pursuing Lehman's social work and adult degree programs. As part of the City University of New York, College Initiative has access to the research tools of New York's extensive public university system. One of the other college programs that works with CI is the BARD Initiative. In addition to GED classes, the BARD Initiative provides college-level instructions at 4 New York correctional facilities. With courses in literature, philosophy, and German, the program provides a true liberal arts curriculum identical to what is offered at Bard College. This program wasn't designed for practical skills, notes Fine. Rather, it is to develop their critical thinking skills, or better yet, life skills. But only a few thousand inmates are handed that prestigious liberal arts degree. Stashed under the stack of fancy college diploma papers, there sits an even thicker pile of inmates' names, waiting for the chance at a high school diploma. Cherise Johnson was one of those neglected names on that waiting list. Wiser than her years is an expression that does not seem to fit Cherise Johnson, a Brooklyn woman who has been struggling with drug abuse and multiple criminal convictions in recent years. Attending the Coalition of Women Prisoners' biggest event of the year, she has come fully armored in personal struggles to tell, but without the GED or college degree to capture her own success story. Although she says she is 26 years old, her youthful appearance suggests she just celebrated her sweet 16. Her hair is styled in short, zigzag cornrows, and her clothes engulf her slight body frame as she sits outside of Emmanuel Baptist Church. The loose blue-striped collared shirt she's wearing reveals her protruding collarbones, and high-waisted jeans are held up by a worn leather belt with fraying loopholes, pulled in tightly. She swings her gangly legs and pumpkin-colored tennis shoes. Cherise talks incessantly about her 6-year-old son, Jaron, but she hasn't had much time to spend with him. Her time has largely belonged to the city government. Ever since she was 18, she has been in and out of city prison for drug charges, while her mother took primary care of her son. 6 weeks ago, she was released again from the female unit at Rikers Island. "I just can't seem to keep myself out of jail," she says in an unfittingly upbeat tone. But this time around, Cherise didn't want to sit idly. She was looking to work towards a better future for herself and her son. "I really wanted to take some GED classes while I was there," said Cherise, "but the waiting list was so long. I knew I wouldn't be getting in." According to the Department of Correction of City of New York, city prisons are required to offer educational services to inmates. However, offering and providing have proven to be two different actions, and Cherise's experience is not uncommon. "It's more of an issue of time constraint than anything else," says Department of Correction Commissioner Martin F. Horn. "Many of the individuals serve their time and leave before having the opportunity to complete the GED program." Project Green Hope, located in East Harlem, is a comprehensive residential treatment program for formerly incarcerated women. Janice Tosto, vocational director at Project Green Hope, who carries out personal on-site assessments, finds that most of the women arrive at Green Hope without a high school diploma or GED. Most of the inmates are released from prison without any of the educational resources that could help them stay out, says Tosto. She has sent many of these women to subsidized, outside GED programs and to a testing center conveniently located down the block. But recently, she received a confused phone call from one of the Green Hope coordinators. "Janice, this center no longer exists." The sad reality, according to Tosto, is that many adult education programs are closing down because they lose funding. Project Green Hope now has to provide on-site GED classes to make up for the shortage. But once women obtain educational credentials, everything else seems to come a little smoother. The stigma that used to come with a criminal history seems to be one thing that has the potential of being lifted. There is a growing awareness just because we incarcerate so many, adds Fromm. Everyone knows one person who has been in jail. But that's not to undercut the hardship still out there. Cherise's unfailing brightness can't help her evade unavoidable realities, and education isn't the only thing that Cherise is missing from her life. It's hard to find a job. It's hard to find permanent housing. It's hard to find health care, she says. I'm fighting for all of that. For Crystal, who has already secured all of the basics of housing, job, and education, it's her life goals that are a bit more far-reaching. "I'm still going to be a doctor," she asserts. "Probably not a medical doctor, but I plan to get my PhD in sociology." With plans to attend Lehman College in the fall semesters to receive her Bachelor's of Social Work, her chances don't look so bad. In the back of her mind, she still wonders whether she could still make it in medicine. I would probably have to leave the country to practice, she muses. So how come New York, a state that has remarkably been able to find a way to provide college education to some former inmates, cannot find the resources towards basic high school education for the rest? The success of the private prison education system in New York can only be bittersweet because the triumphs sit at such a small number. Right now, we are stuck in a patchwork type of system, says Fromm. At the end of the day, the burden falls on shoulders that stretch beyond the incarcerated individual. Maybe it isn't entirely Charissa's fault that she can't seem to stay out of jail. Maybe it's partly ours. Silence of the E's. As you read George Peric's Avoid, you may notice that something important is missing. A detective story about a group of people who disappear one after another. The novel has a detailed plot, style, and characterization, yet the entire 300-page book lacks a key element that is found in almost every other literary work, the letter E. Of course, this is no accident. Peric avoids all words with the letter E, the most frequently used letter in the alphabet, as an exercise of constrained writing. This literary constraint, also known as a lipogram, is one of the many techniques that Peric and other members of the French literary group Oulipo use to generate ideas and inspiration for their writing. NYU grad student Stephen Crum is all too familiar with literary constraints. When you read an Oulipian text, it's pretty obvious, he says. Oulipians don't feel the need to hide the scaffolding. After coming across the literary group during his study abroad in France, Crum went on to write his senior thesis at University of Oklahoma on Oulipian writer Jacques Jouet. After that, Oulipo just kept coming up, he says. So what exactly is Oulipo? Oulipo, an acronym for Oeuvre de littérature potentielle, is the workshop of potential literature. Just like a sonnet or a haiku, Oulipian writing abides to strict rules of literary form. However, the constraints are arbitrary and unusual, and often draw on mathematical permutations. Oulipo founder Raymond Queneau describes Oulipians as rats who build the labyrinth from which they plan to escape, whereas iambic pentameter is harmonious with the natural rhythms of the English language. The Oulipian constraint of n+7, where every noun is replaced with another noun 7 entries after it in a dictionary, is far from a conventional interpretation of language. It turns out to be simultaneously radical and conservative in its approach to art, says Jason Jones, English professor at Central Connecticut State University. Crum, who is now a PhD candidate in French literature, describes an Oulipian writing structure he has worked on, where the first sentence is located in the center of the book, and each subsequent sentence surrounds it like a shell. The way I police it, the outer phrases have to follow a logical sequence, and you can't go back to what was already written inside, he explains. When he is met with confusion, Crum resigns to drawing a diagram of the mathematical sequence. Here's the mathematical center, he points out. Any Oulipian writer will inform you of a dozen or more literary constraints that they personally take pleasure in. There is a cadaic cadenza, where the length of each word corresponded with the digits of pi. The Knight's Tour involves movements made on a chessboard. In a snowball, the first line of the poem is a single letter, and each following line contains a word that is one letter longer as to create a pyramid shape. A chimera takes a chosen text, removes the nouns, verbs, and adjectives, and replaces them with the corresponding parts of speech from 3 different texts. Similar to Peric, some poets have adopted the technique called belle absente, or beautiful outlaw, in which a love poem is written without using the letters of the person's name of whom it is addressed to. The previously mentioned n+7 method is probably the easiest and most popular Oulipian constraint. Oulipo may initially come off as a pseudo-intellectual fad, but it has been an established literary movement in France for several decades. Oulipo was founded in 1960 by French writers Raymond Queneau and François Le Lyonnais. previously members of Surrealism and Dada, respectively. They created Oulipo to reject the concept of automatic writing. Surrealism promises a lot to activate your subconscious and draw on a higher credence. Oulipo doesn't make promises like that, says New York writer Tom Lafarge. Poking fun at the romanticized notion of the poet as a mystic, Oulipian writers developed a hyperstructured form to rebel against existing ideas about literary inspiration. Made up of mainly French-speaking writers and mathematicians, the group currently has 36 official members, with 13 of the members excused from meetings for having died. Member Jacques Roubaud once stated that the members of the Oulipo are characters in an unwritten novel by Raymond Queneau. Although American readers may not immediately recognize Oulipo under its formal name, Oulipian sparks are scattered throughout modern lexis. High school English teachers instruct students on palindromes and alliteratives. Poets use writing techniques such as exquisite corpse and I remember poems to get their creative juices flowing. And even popular childhood games such as Mad Libs and Telephone contain Oulipian modes of thinking. Oulipians divulge in the playful side of word games and linguistic quips that generate original literary work. Reading an Oulipo text can make you feel like the victim of a prank, says Jones. You spend a certain amount of time trying to unpack a line's meaning, and then you discover that it was produced according to a quasi-arbitrary rule. The reader is often placed in a position of doubt and uncertainty when it comes to understanding Oulipian text. You're always left wondering to what extent the line is there to produce some effect, or is it just there to satisfy the rule, Jones adds. Not to say that meaning cannot be found in Oulipian work. In The Void, Peric's exclusion of the letter E may be about more than just a literary challenge. Peric's disappearing E corresponds to the French pronoun eux, or them, and is a representation of the author's parents, who disappeared during his early childhood as Jews in Nazi-occupied France. Peric later explained that this book was the means of approaching a subject that he could not face directly. Similarly, New York-based fiction writer Wendy Walker recently drew on Oulipo for inspiration when she came across the 1860 case of the Road Hill House murder. Fascinated with a sensational true story of a young girl named Constance Kent who confessed to a murder she did not commit, Walker soon realized that the case had already been exhaustively covered in half a dozen books. Rather than putting it out of her mind, Walker decided to take an Oulipian approach to the murder case and invented her own literary constraint. My hope was not just to adopt the forms, but take them to create larger things that apply to the material that I was looking at, Walker explains. When Walker encountered Joseph Stapleton's The Great Crime of 1860, the first true crime genre book, she was repelled by his sexist old boy tone. Therefore, Walker decided to reconfigure the Road Hill House murder based on Stapleton's work. She selected one word from each line of his book, but without choosing two words that followed consecutively. She added up the number of words in each section and selected the same number of lines from other books about Constance, the detective novels that were inspired by her, and books that she had read before her death. She combined the two sections into a mosaic of short, poetic passages. Every text contains its own critique. Like a statue hidden in a block of marble, Walker says, one has only to liberate it. Oulipian processes will oftentimes convey political beliefs as well. At the Proteus Gowanus Gallery and Reading Room in Brooklyn, a copy of the first page of the New York Times inconspicuously hangs on the wall. But at second glance, you notice that the artist has artfully cut out every word and glued them back together in alphabetical order. He provides a glimpse into U.S. political agenda. After a number of A's and An's, there is a row of Iraqs, followed by a row of oils. The artist passively conveys what the newspaper, or more accurately, The Times York, is focused on. Typically, you are going to ask, "What am I saying?" when you really should be asking, "What is being said?" Lafarge says. Although Oulipian writers surrender their initial independence, they must personally unravel the hidden meanings in their work. It really matters who is using the process, says Walker. Sometimes Oulipo procedure can simply help overcome the timeless ailment of writer's block. Marcel Benebeau wrote, "Why I have not written any of my books," and subsequently achieved his lifelong goal of publishing a full-length book. Benebeau introduced a constraint called antonymy, or the replacement of a designated element by its opposite. The constraint can be extended to replacing letters, words, or short statements. So how will Oulipo capture the attention of the Internet generation? Many people are trading in their dictionaries and protractors for virtual content. A blog launched by Lance Newman, 3x3x3.blogspot.com, is entirely devoted to a new constraint called 3x3x3. After picking 3 news stories from Google News, the writer must only use words found in the first 3 paragraphs of each story. The poem includes 3 stanzas, 3 lines each, with no more than 60 characters per line. Mechanical aids are encouraged, and the site includes a link to a text scrambler, which will scramble any text that is typed in the box. Oulipo continues to thrive in its innovative forms. Almost 50 years after Oulipo was established, the living members still continue to meet in Paris on a monthly basis to share their writing and constraints. To uphold their tradition, Proteus Gowanus recently hosted 2 Oulipo workshops in Brooklyn as well. Led by Lafarge and Walker, the workshop introduced Oulipian writing and concepts to Brooklyn artists and writers. I make drawings based on mathematical rules, so I was intrigued by the possibility of using mathematical rules to write poetry, says artist Susan Happersett, who attended the second workshop. This led to poetry inspired from Proverbs to the Fibonacci sequence. I would love to do a monthly group like the one in Paris where they make dinner and write together regularly, said author-publisher Esther Smith, who attended both Oulipo workshops. Although Oulipo has the potential of reaching cult status in the United States, it is unlikely to have a noticeable impact on contemporary literature. After all, Oulipo-inspired writers and artists seem uninterested in coming together under the Oulipo banner. Formal literary movements have canons of correctness and manifestos, said Lafarge. We don't go for that. Rather, Oulipo gives readers a quick glimpse into the underlying process of creative writing. It's important just to have fun with it, says Crum. Oulipo reminds us that writing does not come from the lightning bolt of inspiration. And if you ever choose to attempt Perrick's disappearing E-trick, keep this fact in mind. The article you just read contains 1,028 of them. A sociological examination of embryonic stem cell research, the possibilities and limitations of its framework. Although embryonic stem cell research is a relatively new scientific field of research, it has quickly entered pre-existing social structures and public discourse. Social, political, and economic forces surrounding stem cells have shaped its scientific progression. The semantics and media coverage of the debate have played a significant role in conveying the sociological framework to the population. Stem cells are potent, self-renewing cells that have the potential to replace tissues and organs, repair defective cell types, and deliver genetic therapies and chemotherapeutic agents. With the potential to treat life-threatening illnesses, such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and different types of cancer, there is massive public involvement. The success of adult stem cells in treating leukemia and other diseases has been followed by piqued interest in embryonic stem cells. The possibilities of embryonic stem cells have not yet been fully explored by researchers. The medical benefits of embryonic stem cell research have been impeded by ethical and financial questions. Embryonic stem cell research is no longer limited to discussion in the academic community. The sociological framework. The stem cell research discussion has been disseminated into the public sphere, due largely to the need for research funding. By refusing to allot federal funds towards embryonic stem cell research, President Bush asserted his personal ideology upon the scientific community and society as a whole. He sent the message to the country that stem cell research equates to the further destruction of human life. Using his political power, he imposed a moral framework for our society to rest upon. Nevertheless, social players that are traditionally perceived to be less powerful have created a counter-hegemonic movement to combat this existing framework. The lack of support from federal governmental actors has mobilized other actors' fight restrictive federal policies. Currently, state players are playing the largest role in creating the policies of stem cell research. Moreover, the social influence of these actors working within the state level is growing because of their socioeconomic powers. The social players of the stem cell research have been able to effectively mobilize because of the high socioeconomic position of the populations that are affected. Patient advocacy groups have mobilized their networks to gain support and funding, and wealthy individuals have donated large sums of money to the illnesses that directly affect their lives and their loved ones. Although stem cell research as a whole has gained significant social and economic capital, in turn, it has ignored certain diseases that require new cures and issues of unequal health access and care. The shift from federal to state action has been possible in part by the grassroots organization that has occurred. State-level action has produced the social change that individuals and patients groups are looking for. Although a number of states have stepped in to meet the financial need, they are unable to create policy uniformity and general oversight over the stem cell research. There is a hope that state-level organization will ultimately transform the federal framework. The sociological frame of the media has structured the way in which it has taken the stem cell debate in both constructive and harmful directions. While it has successfully educated and garnered the support of the larger non-scientific population, media coverage has staged a debate that does not accurately reflect what is actually occurring in the scientific community. Federal limitations and state mobilization. The current stagnation of embryonic stem cell research is due to President George W. Bush's implementation of the Dickey Amendment in 2001. The amendment prohibits the use of federal funding for embryonic stem cell research. He allowed funding for research on already existing human embryonic stem cell lines that were created prior to August 9, 2001. His policy attempted to balance value and respect for life with the promise of science and hope of saving life. President Bush has been criticized for using non-objective justification to make his decision to block federal funding for embryonic stem cell research. Ironically, the Dickey Amendment has created a greater interest in stem cell research by propelling 4 states to fill the vacuum. The political reality created by President Bush's policies and powerful religious leaders opposed to stem cell research has caused many scientists to take on additional mission of ensuring that democracy works. The restrictive federal ban has led to state initiatives, most notably California's Proposition 71. Many states have followed California's model. Presently, the states of New Jersey, Maryland, Missouri, and Illinois have all committed state funds to research. State power is only a partial element of stem cell research advancement. The growing support for stem cell research has become a counter-hegemonic endeavor of grassroots organizations. Before President Bush made his veto on the pursuit of embryonic stem cell research, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation held a hearing on Capitol Hill, where a panel of young people recounted their personal experiences with juvenile diabetes. Furthermore, there was a day in 2001 when the White House switchboard was virtually shut down because of the number of phone calls being made by individuals encouraging stem cell support from President Bush. Since these efforts were unsuccessful, states decided that stem cells cannot be left to purely legislative action. In California, they felt if they took the case directly to the people, the California population would decisively demonstrate that they cared enough to act when their elected officials would not. Stem cell advocates decided to bypass the state legislature and ratify through the citizen initiative system. It is an example of the governance approach to sociology through a non-centralized structure. The legal political conversation on stem cell research follows sociologist and economist Boaventura de Sousa Santos's governance approach to law. First, interests are discursively formed. Personal experiences with illness were an effective starting point for discourse to ignite. Opinions on stem cell research were then enabled by the citizens' initiatives and the media campaign that followed. The biotechnology has the potential to affect the survival of loved ones, so it is capable of crossing racial, gender, political party lines. Secondly, economic gains and political efficiency is obtained through local knowledge. Although government officials extended their decision-making authority, other channels were utilized to reach the desired social ends. Smaller-scale interests produce their own political and economic power and essentially overturn the ruling ideas of the Bush administration. Thirdly, decision-making authority is transferred to the local scale and to all the relevant stakeholders. State officials, private biotech companies, and taxpayers seized decision-making authority from federal officials in dealing with stem cell policies. Lastly, Santos calls for a redistribution of resources. Without federal funds, resources were retrieved elsewhere in order to create the conditions for embryonic stem cell research to occur within the state and private sectors. These deliberative processes allowed social support for embryonic stem cell research to be created outside of a centralized political structure. Although state initiatives have gained influence in spite of federal blocks, the current patchwork system will only function to a certain extent. It will be unable to lead to a cohesive system of organizing comprehensive scientific discoveries. Without a national foothold, policies may conflict. Stem cell research could be duplicative in the absence of a national body, like the National Institutes of Health, funding the research and functioning as an information clearinghouse on research efforts around the country. Also, current restrictions have created impractical implications and unnecessary divisions of labor. At Harvard University's Stem Cell Institute, they buy 2 sets of equipment for scientists, one for federally funded research and the other for all other types of research. The different allocations of funding have created layers of bureaucracy. An inclusive policy would allow a compromise of moral guidelines and a financial framework. The network of scientists needs an encompassing moral and financial framework to work within. Proposition 71, California Stem Cell Research and Cures Initiative. The state of California has become a forerunner in the state-level field to advance embryonic stem cell research. Proposition 71 was a California ballot initiative that would channel $3 billion in general obligation bonds to fund stem cell research in California. The established California Institute for Regenerative Medicine has already awarded 229 research grants of more than $615 million since 2005. The proposition established a constitutional right to conduct stem cell research. Because Proposition 71 was an initiative that California residents saw on the ballot, public involvement was greater than a Senate vote. California has a unique position as an epicenter for citizen target initiatives. Before the campaign for Proposition 71 was undertaken, there was less than 40% support for the initiative. The proposition was passed by a 59% to 41% margin. The Yes on 71 campaign looked towards the media and celebrity support to garner the political power that they needed. Yes on 71 ultimately raised $25.1 million, while No on 71 raised about $635,000. Their financial advantage played a significant role in garnering widespread support of California residents. The proposition won over all but the most die-hard fiscal and social conservatives. In order to attract the largest audiences, most of the budget was allocated toward media advertising, resulting in 15 different television ads, mostly with celebrity patients. On the contrary, very little organized opposition emerged. The proponents' ability to employ the media in their favor ultimately produce their desired social effects. In spite of the pervading moral questions presented by President Bush, opponents of Proposition 71 took an unpredictable but perhaps more effective approach to stop the proposal. Since California has a socially liberal majority, opponents took an economic approach. Rather than preaching the moral bankruptcy of stem cell research, they have brought up fiscal complications to raise doubt in taxpayers' minds. The initiative outlines a 30-year repayment schedule that would result in a total cost of $6 billion from the general fund. Revenue growth is dependent on significant research success. According to opponents, big pharmaceutical companies and venture capitalists are taking advantage of taxpayers to fund a very narrow field of stem cell research. In addition, funding for other health and public safety programs are being cut. When California is already strapped for state funds, the perception of fiscal irresponsibility becomes more pronounced. Fox News described Proposition 71 as a transfer of $3 billion from already strapped California taxpayers to already wealthy venture capitalists and researchers by means of emotional extortion. In addition, the economic recession brings more doubts. California's state budget deficit is said to be $28 billion over the next 2 years. By tackling the proposition's more tangible effects rather than abstract moral arguments, the public will be able to see the possible consequences. Merging semantics and ethics. In the discussion of stem cell research, the wording often reveals more about the speaker's position than the argument itself. The semantics are oftentimes the foundation of the stem cell debate. Supporters of stem cell research often discuss the specific scientific processes of extracting embryonic stem cells. Scientists have gone as far as to rename embryos nuclear transfer constructs or a surplus product of in vitro fertilization. In scientific terms, a blastocyst is a mass of 100 cells the size of 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters in diameter. The blastocyst, often referred to as a preembryo, forms 5 to 6 days after conception. The term preembryo refers to the first 2 weeks of human development. Supporters subdivide the stages of embryonic development to include pre-embryonic and blastocysts. However, those who are against stem cell research tend to lump embryonic development into a single stage of human life. They know that pre-embryo is not an actual scientific term. Jarmulowicz derisively described the term pre-embryo as an exercise of linguistic engineering to make human embryo research more palatable to the general public. Conservatives have also described it as the mass production of developing human lives in order to destroy them, or fetal farming. A resolution to this disagreement cannot be found in scientific works, as the definition of when life begins derives from religious faith and personal belief. In the ethical debate, there are 3 categories assigned to human development and moral status. Genetic determination, which is the belief held by most opponents, claims the life and moral status begin at conception. On the other side of the spectrum, the social view is that personhood and moral status are socially constructed. In between, the developmental views concede that life begins at conception, but moral status is determined by the degree of development. Different religions take different views on when human life begins as well. Catholicism holds the staunch belief that the zygote is a human being that should not be destroyed. In Islam, Judaism, and the majority of Protestantism, the zygote has not developed into a human being, and thus it is not morally objectionable to use in research. Although social attitudes toward stem cell policy are subject to change, related legal frameworks must be abided. Foremost, both abortion and in vitro fertilization are legal in the United States. Although certain religious groups may be morally opposed to these practices, they are legal according to U.S. federal law. Therefore, stem cell research must align with the modern conception and acceptance of organ donation and in vitro fertilization, Support in opposition to scientific research is not necessarily based on fact, but ideology. Defining personhood is not a scientific endeavor, but a religious or metaphysical matter. It is not clear what people who are opposed to embryonic stem cell research would like to do with previously frozen embryos. Thousands of unused embryos not used for in vitro treatments are destroyed by removing them from liquid nitrogen and thawing them. On the other hand, there is currently a federal ban on both reproductive and therapeutic human cloning. In order to avoid other semantic traps, supporters dismiss any link to cloning and abortion and other politically charged terms. Cloning is the process of creating a genetically identical copy, but in general public understanding, cloning is often linked to the copy of an entire organism rather than a gene, cell, or tissue. A discursive fear towards cloning existed long before the technology was even possible. Films such as The Clones, 1973, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956, set a public aversion towards cloning. Many politicians have employed the public's distaste for human cloning to garner opposition to stem cell research. Cloning has been declared dangerous and likely to fail by the National Research Council. Most stem cell initiatives, including California's Proposition 71, provide provisions that prohibit cloning. Similar to current restrictions on federal funding over embryonic stem cell research, federal laws prohibit funding for human cloning. Globalization of scientific research has created competition for scientific discoveries. It is accepted that science will continue to advance, whether Americans decide to partake in it or not. If the United States wants to maintain the perception that it is the most powerful nation in the world, it must be a leader in the breakthroughs of stem cell technology. Where the United States drops the ball, another country will pick it right up. From this point, there is a utilitarian view of society. Should ethical concerns be discarded to uncover the greater utility of embryonic stem cells? Scientific hegemony relies on the idea that good science is good policy. By positioning society towards a pro-research stance, the United States can continue its dominating presence in the global scientific community. With the secularization of society, traditional religious hegemony is being reconfigured in the stem cell debate. The notion that religion is fundamentally against scientific progress is being challenged by the emerging enthusiasm for adult stem cell research. It breaks the established conception that religious institutions are against any scientific progress. Comparisons to the abortion debate. Although the ethical content of stem cell research is often equated to the abortion debate, a fundamental difference distinguishes the two: the social outcome. Stem cell research has the potential to lead to cures and treatment for diseases that lead to a tangible, positive social contribution, while the legal standing of abortion would only establish, theoretically, the validation of moral principles. Abortion mainly impacts certain individuals and does not have a significant effect on the overall social good. The collective goal of society is currently positioned towards decreasing the overall number of abortions and increasing cures for disease. It is difficult for the semantic categories of pro-life and pro-choice often used in the abortion debate to apply to the stem cell debate. Stem cell scientist Doug Melton argues, one could almost consider our position pro-life. We took something that was going to be destroyed and isolated cells from it that could improve the lives of people suffering from disease and trauma. While unwanted pregnancies impact a small population of women, illness is not distributed in accordance with party lines. Republicans have crossed over in support of stem cell research because it is not a battle fought by the Democrats, but the plights of patients who suffer from Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, spinal cord injuries, and other health problems that stem cell research may someday alleviate. Even within the White House, President Bush's veto created a division among Republicans who favor stem cell research. A May 11, 2004 New York Times editorial titled "Republicans for Stem Cell Research" pointed out that over 30 Republicans, including anti-abortion conservatives, signed a letter of 200 House members urging President Bush to relax his restrictions. With unease in the White House, stem cell advocates created new politics without the inclusion of political parties that dictated specific constraints. Economic forces. With funding as the driving force in the socio-scientific debate over stem cell research, other economic relationships are revealed within the social framework. Monetary support will open up to other social privileges and responsibilities of the financial actors. The challenge has been balancing the fine line between financial obligations and the need for public transparency. Currently, several private companies have emerged to conduct stem cell research with private funds. These companies, like any other for-profit company, strive to gain profit from their products and services. For example, Professor James Thompson of the University of Wisconsin has faced scrutiny in his involvement with Cellular Dynamics International. With private investors and $2 million from the state of Wisconsin, Cellular Dynamics strives to create profits from stem cell research. Professor Thompson coaxed stem cells into developing adult human heart cells and now charges researchers for access to cell lines. On the Cellular Dynamics International website, there is a tab, Request a Quote. After asking to provide general information, they ask to please indicate all cell lines in which you are interested: cardiac cells, hematopoietic cells, hepatocytes, renal cells, neural cells, and other. In an interview published in Natural Reports, Thompson says, "We have a bank for stem cells here, and the cost per cell line is very large, but there are economies of scale that can be met because there are many requests for stem cell lines. Even federally approved lines, which are of lesser quality than newer lines, cost approximately $5,000. Without regulatory guidelines of public state policy or university regulations, private companies have more opportunities to commercialize their work. In the public eye, stem cell research should continue to align itself with public awareness and patient assistance. But without public support, stem cell research cannot be expected to work towards the public interest. So where is the rightful location of stem cell research in the private or public sector? Today, business culture is merging with the academic culture to such a degree that it may prevent collaboration and the sharing of information that could lead to significant advancements. Without being restricted to government funding, private companies, such as Cellular Dynamics International, are not subjected to strict oversight. In their commitment to secure their own funds, any profit will be kept within the company and its investors. If state funding leads to economic growth, taxpayers will benefit from the state economic growth. On the other hand, state-funded organizations and university researchers will have steady funding, but be forced to abide by an agreed set of ethical guidelines. Government involvement opens up the research to political oversight and public scrutiny. By maintaining transparency of the research, public input is ensured. Since stem cell research is such a politicized issue with high stakes, there will undeniably be pressure to develop technologies as quickly as possible. Similarly, Dr. Irving Weissman has faced criticism in his endorsement of Proposition 71. As a cancer researcher at Stanford University, his involvement and options deal with Stem Cell Incorporated, a biotech company engaged in research with adult stem cells, has been played down in his Yes on Proposition 71 television ads. Rather, these ads emphasize that he is the director of Stanford University's Institute for Cancer Stem Cell Biology and Medicine, and also the California Scientist of the Year for 2002. By passing Proposition 71, the company increased its share price from $2 to $5.25. As a founder for Stem Cells Incorporated, he was offered 1.6 million shares of company stock. Proposition 71 opponents believe that this affiliation presents a conflict of interest that is not being disclosed to the television viewers. Stem cell opponents are against the idea that certain businesses and individuals will profit from medical research. When profit is entered into the equation, there is an underlying sense of public distrust. Stem cell developments have the potential to follow the lucrative path of other past technologies, such as the billion-dollar industry of microchips in Silicon Valley. In the current stem cell market, approximately $150 million is spent on research. In contrast, the U.S. drug market is worth $300 billion. There is hope that embryonic stem cell research will lead to economic development in the biotechnology field. An increase in research and technology can potentially lead to further jobs in the biotechnology field and pharmaceutical and medicinal manufacturing. The challenge is not removing the marketplace from the equation, but ensuring that the market be used to advance the common good. Nevertheless, it is difficult to know whether Proposition 71 would have passed with such ease if the ballot vote took place after the breaking of the current economic crisis. Although future economic profits are very likely, it is not a guarantee. If financial anxieties were as high as they are now, taxpayers may have not been willing to make such a substantial investment in stem cell research. The impact of the economic state demonstrates the significance of forces outside of the purely scientific realm. Socioeconomic changes have the power to transform how scientific research is being funded, conducted, and disseminated. Social inequality of stem cell research. Even if the research field is evened out by federal funding and disease treatments are successfully patented, these developments will not result in equal patient access to the products. An economic report at Stanford University predicted that the state of California could save $3.4 billion to $6.9 billion in governmental health care costs and $9.2 billion to $18.4 billion in private health care costs from developing stem cell technology. Another commissioned report in Michigan cited the potential to save millions of dollars in Medicaid as a reason to lift its current restrictive state laws. However, it seems unlikely that the populations that depend on Medicaid will be the ones who will be receiving stem cell treatment. Even prior to successful treatments being discovered, research will be directed towards diseases that have a higher frequency in Caucasians, such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, while predominantly African American sufferers of sickle cell anemia are ignored. Although genetic diversity certainly does not equate to ethnic and racial diversity, the limited number of stem cell lines restrict the number of patients that will eventually benefit. Just like organ transplants, there is a possibility that tissues derived from stem cells will be rejected by the immune system. Currently, bone marrow transplants help whites disproportionately more than blacks. Because the donor and recipient must have similar tissue types, about 88% of Caucasians are able to find a suitable donor, while only 60% of African Americans find the same luck. According to the American Association for Cancer Research, individuals with lower socioeconomic status have less chances of early detection of diseases and are more likely to develop and die from cancer. This is attributed to a lack of health insurance, poverty, language and cultural barriers, and inadequate access to medical care. Development of stem cell treatments would not correct for the inequality that is embedded in our current healthcare system. Once stem cell technology is developed, there are not any policies that will ensure equal access to those who seek stem cell treatment. It will take a significant amount of time before stem cell technologies would trickle down to aid the underclasses. Any progress in stem cell research will continue to disproportionately benefit wealthy individuals who have access to these technologies. For another minority, women, a shortage of available embryos could lead to a danger of women being exploited for their eggs. As the amount of stem cell research activity increases, so will the demand for frozen embryos. With California and other states prohibiting monetary incentives for women to donate their eggs, scientists are already experiencing an availability shortage. If these policies are reversed to acquire more eggs through the means of monetary incentives, Many policymakers believe that poor women will disproportionately represent the group of egg providers. Economically, disadvantaged women would put themselves at serious health risks in order to receive money. Not only do the drugs that coax eggs occasionally lead to serious medical complications, doctors who are paying for the eggs would have a financial interest in administering higher doses of the drugs to harvest a maximum number of eggs. Along with the fear of exploitation, there is the argument that women should be paid a fair wage for their reproductive labor and tissues. Fertility treatment is an example of reproductive compensation. Women would still be getting exploited if they were not compensated for the acquired health risks and general inconvenience. Again, a semantics issue is raised between egg donors and egg providers. Before the legalization of egg compensation can be legitimately discussed, the threat of exploiting economically disadvantaged women must be directly addressed. With these numerous practical considerations in stem cell research, it is not surprising that inequality has yet to be directly addressed by advocacy groups, politicians, and the media. Media framework. The general public generally does not have technical scientific training to understand the processes of extracting embryonic stem cells. Most voters depend on local discursive knowledge. Therefore, people are more susceptible to persuasion in scientific issues compared to other social issues. Justifications of stem cell research must be publicly perceivable, concrete, and objective. The public needs to accept that the research will lead to the most effective medical treatment, which is often achieved by emotional appeal. Casting the debate in terms of claims about relative magnitude or speed of producing hypothetical cures for diseases and conditions results in arguments over how to compare current research and future potential, provoking dueling claims of who is expressing scientific opinion or personal opinion. Oftentimes, the risks can be drowned out by the projection of the benefits. Both sides of the issue are guilty of turning an objective scientific discussion into an emotional appeal in the media stage. Celebrity endorsements have played a significant role in advocating stem cell research. Many of Hollywood's A-list has publicly declared their support to the cause, alongside 22 Nobel laureates and over 50 patient and disease advocacy groups. Even Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, a moderate Republican, made a partially political move by stating his support for Proposition 71. Other renowned celebrities such as Michael J. Fox, Christopher Reeve, and Mary Tyler Moore have established their credibility by discussing their personal illnesses. Fox, who created the Michael J. Fox Foundation and lobbied in Congress, also produced a campaign spot for Democrat Claire McCaskill for Missouri Senate, where he is uncontrollably swaying back and forth, a sad and visible indication of Parkinson's taking over his body. The stem cell issue has been deeply personalized by taking recognizable faces and associating their threatened lives with the hope of embryonic stem cells. The only major celebrity who has publicly spoken out against stem cell research is Mel Gibson. In an attempt to organize the debate, the media has structured the stem cell debate into embryonic versus adult stem cells. Any breakthrough with adult stem cells is portrayed to reduce the need for embryonic stem cell research. When Dr. Thompson's laboratory reported a way to turn ordinary human skin cells into apparent embryonic stem cells, the New York Times published an article titled, "Man Who Helped Start Stem Cell War May End It." The article does not describe the various levels of potency, totipotent, pluripotent, multipotent, oligopotent, unipotent, etc., to address the varied differentiation potentials in stem cells. The media has given the perception that adult stem cells can function identically to embryonic stem cells, and the public does not have the scientific training to question it further. It is impossible to know whether embryonic stem cell research will act like adult and cord blood stem cells without further research. It's a little disingenuous for opponents who have effectively blocked federal funding of the work to then cite a lack of progress. said Sean Tipton, Director of Public Affairs at the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. You hold someone at the starting line, then you criticize them for not getting any far. Opponents have tried to create the social structure that blocks its inclusion in the scientific paradigm. They have created their social reality by blocking certain activity and then presenting it to the public as unsuccessful. The media has encouraged the polarization between embryonic and adult stem cell research, perpetuating the ruling ideas of embryonic stem cell opponents. Socio-historical comparison. A socio-historical analysis of the social and medical progress of polio in the 1950s can conceivably predict the future progression of stem cell treatment. Polio, or poliomyelitis, is an acute viral disease that causes inflammation of nerve cells of the brainstem and spinal cord, leading to paralysis and death. In a July 26, 1948 Time article, polio is described as the disease most feared by U.S. mothers, with no known methods to prevent or cure it. Today's current incurable diseases such as cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's disease are faced with the same trepidation. Without stem cell research, it is uncertain whether a cure will ever be found for these illnesses. One must take note of the populations that the disease affected. Polio hit hardest in well-to-do communities, along with children. Polio is previously referred to as infantile paralysis. Millions of Americans generously donated to the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis and March of Dimes. If it were not for the social and economic forces, scientists could still be looking for a cure. Although Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin made a spectacular scientific breakthrough, it would have been impossible without the positive social circumstances directly cultivating their success. The current social context and actors may have a similar propelling effect on stem cell research. Similar grassroots action among wealthy and famous communities has taken place for stem cell advocacy. By 2001, about 50,000 people were actively advocating stem cell research in groups such as the Coalition for the Advancement of Medical Research, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and the Parkinson's Action Network. Furthermore, celebrity involvement from Mary Tyler Moore, Christopher Reeve, Nancy Reagan, and Michael J. Fox has had a substantial impact on the cause. Just as former President Franklin D. Roosevelt garnered support for a cure for polio, former President Ronald Reagan's death from Alzheimer's disease has fostered similar collaboration for stem cell research. First Lady Nancy Reagan made a public plea for support of stem cell research at a fundraising gala for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. In her speech, she stated, "Science has presented us with a hope called stem cell research, which may provide our scientists with answers that have long been beyond our grasp. I just don't see how we can turn our backs on this. There are just so many diseases that can be cured or at least helped. We have lost so much time already, and I just really can't bear to lose more." The polio movement has imprinted in today's culture an attitude towards citizen-based social responsibility for health and public education. Individual and group socioeconomic influence is frequently being employed to produce desired social change. A comparative examination of polio and stem cell research shows the potential for mobilization outside of the larger governmental framework to provide the economic and social support that is needed to advance stem cell treatments. Conclusion. The social, political, and economic forces that determine the positioning of stem cell research within the social structure demonstrate that scientists cannot act autonomously within the scientific field. The United States government's attempt to restrict stem cell research has resulted in the mobilization of state and advocacy group players. Due to its emphasis in the political arena and its extensive media coverage, the semantics of stem cell research has played a crucial role in shaping public perceptions of it. Even though moral convictions continue to direct the stem cell debate, they have stopped being a major player in the discourse. Rather, underlying economic forces have guided the direction of stem cell research. The shifting emphasis towards economic concerns has proven the secularized and capitalistic character of contemporary society. President-elect Barack Obama has promised to reverse limits on the Bush administration's restrictions on federal funding of embryonic stem cell research within his first 20 days in office. He stated, "I strongly support expanding research on stem cells. I believe that the restrictions that President Bush has placed on funding of human embryonic stem cell research have handcuffed our scientists and hindered our ability to compete with other nations." He also ensures that all research on stem cells will be conducted ethically and with rigorous oversight. As the legal framework adjusts, the social processes will modify accordingly. My current sociological analysis is only relevant within the current social context, although socio-historical analysis of prior bioscience issues provides some insight into the future progression of stem cell research. It is too early to know whether embryonic stem cell research will deliver the promises of treatment and cures, and the cost-benefit analysis is still largely hypothetical. In addition, legal decisions cannot be expected to allay ethical qualms. As historian Paul Kennedy once noted, the results of stem cell research will depend on the skills with which we manage to sail on the stream of time. Since social actors function within the overall sociological framework, the progress of stem cell research will continue to be a pertinent case study in the prevailing social paradigm of biotechnology. Turtle. In Midtown New York, the corporate chatter of pinstripe suits clashes with the clicking of Gucci loafers on obsessively swept streets. As a cloud of productivity hangs dauntingly in the air, the constant flow of movement maintains a pace that would be unnatural anywhere else in the world. Insatiability runs the streets voraciously, as real human contact becomes a fabricated memory. Right off 3rd Avenue, between 48th and 49th Streets, the sounds of Midtown become suddenly muted. A row of exquisite 3-story brownstones lives unnaturally among the corporate buildings. The quiet road is untainted by the ostentatious spirit of capitalism. The Turtle Bay Historical Garden District appears to be nothing more than a misplaced relic of a pristine past. Yet contradiction has never stopped New York City before. In the 1920s, the yards of 2 rows of townhouses were set back to back and turned into a communal garden by taking a 6-foot strip from each plot to form a common path. Low walls and individual plantings mark the private yards. A large willow tree located in the interior garden is a lasting visual for E.B. White's love letter to the city, a book called Here is New York. It is a battered tree, long-suffering and much climbed, held together by strands of wire, but beloved of those who know it, White wrote. In a way, it symbolizes the city. Life under difficulties, growth against odds, sap rise in the midst of concrete, and the steady reaching for the sun. The amalgamation of neighborhood charm and proximity to big city lights has transformed Turtle Bay into arguably the most desirable neighborhood in New York City. According to Tulia, a residential real estate search engine, the average list price of a home in Turtle Bay is $1,122,184. The houses are worth millions, doorman George Susu said, but it is the best place in the world. Nevertheless, inquiries about E.B. White's willow tree are met with blank stares by passing pedestrians. During the day, doormen and cleaning ladies avoid conversation as if they are obedient children taught to not speak to strangers. The interior garden emanates as a myth in the public's eye. Turtle Bay is too proud to reveal its humble beginnings. As waves of immigrants moved to New York City in the late 19th century, Turtle Bay was nothing more than an assortment of crumbling tenements and roaming houses. Migrant workers were eventually joined by New York night dwellers, haunted by the overwhelming allure of music and literature, but possessing very little money. a new subculture emerged where artistic ascendancy would dominate these humble abodes. As 7 p.m. rolls around, Grand Central Terminal becomes the epicenter of crumpled suits and tired faces as the verve of Midtown drains away into corporate residue. Concurrently, Turtle Bay continues to murmur quietly, as if time were just an illusion. Presently, writers James Brady and Kurt Vonnegut call Turtle Bay home, distant from rigid schedules, beeping blackberries, and unfamiliar voices. Brady knows about matters which are forgotten by the public eye. The first line of his book, The Coldest War, a Memoir of Korea, reads, "The Korean War, which President Truman called a police action and Averell Harriman a sour little war, and which today is largely forgotten, began 40 years ago, on the morning of Sunday, June 25, 1950, when 90,000 North Korean troops pushed across the 38th parallel and came south." Brady writes about the forgotten war from the forgotten corners of his New York sanctuary. Turtle Bay is the dream that any Marine lieutenant struggling through senseless endeavors of war would block from his mind. His cushioned dwellings offset the disastrous memories he triggers from his mind. Then again, Vonnegut surrenders to the fluid connection between Turtle Bay and his literary imagination. Turtle Bay plays both the literal and figurative backdrop of his 1999 novel, Slapstick. "I am still not clear how I got here. There are no turtles, there is no bay," Vonnegut wrote. "Perhaps I am the turtle, able to live simply anywhere, even underwater, for short periods, with my home on my back." Preceding these literary minds, actor Tyrone Power, journalist Dorothy Thompson, editor Maxwell Perkins, and actresses Mary Martin and Katharine Hepburn paved the heart of Turtle Bay. However, true New Yorkers are not ones to be fazed by anything or anyone. When asked about her knowledge of the area's historical significance, Turtle Bay resident Patricia Millman was impartial. "That's not important to me. I just like the apartment," Millman said. She has resided in Turtle Bay for the last 30 years. White was not blinded by an idealistic New York that many of us dream of either. He felt the continuous pulsation of the city, accumulating new tones and rhythms, until the point where static memories of old times were erased completely. White eerily foreshadowed the September 11th terrorist attacks, 52 years before its deliberation entered the minds of embittered souls. "The city, for the first time in its long history, is destructible," White wrote. "A single flight of planes no bigger than a wedge of geese can quickly end this island fantasy, burn the towers, crumble the bridges, turn the underground passages into lethal chambers, cremate the millions. The intimidation of mortality is part of New York now, in the sound of jets overhead, in the black headlines of the latest edition." White, who elicited several generations' worth of tears for a spider named Charlotte, somehow sensed the immense grief that would eventually engulf New York City. Phone and email requests sent to the Turtle Bay Association were unanswered. Access to the gardens were unattainable, as gates remained closed and doors stayed locked. The hope of literary inspiration remains unattainable to the outsiders who seek it. The garden's inaccessibility to the public embodies another sort of New York characteristic, one where exclusiveness is prized. White's self-proclaimed memorial is discreetly hidden behind rows of pretentious brownstones. Perhaps its veiled existence is the only possible path to preservation. If it were to go, all would go. This city, this mischievous and marvelous monument, which not to look upon would be like death, White wrote. Only Turtle Bay holds the secrets of neighborhood bliss that seem lost to the rest of the urban trenches. Doorman Susu's face lights up as two people enter the building late in the evening. Carrying a violin case, a little Asian girl with pigtails walks in with her mother at her side. The girl stops to high-five Susu before walking into the elaborately brocaded elevator. Susu winks at her before the elevator doors close shut before her. "That was my best friend in the whole building," Susu said. empowerment, and the modern penal system. Although the term empowerment has largely held positive linguistic connotations, its application in the discourse of contemporary U.S. welfare and penal systems has transformed in a caustic manner. It is perhaps the widely accepted framing of the word that conceals the fundamental problems of the empowerment discourse. Although the welfare and penal systems have been subjected to convergence in areas of policy, institution, and function, the discursive convergence is most significant. It impacts the manner in which policies and practices are implemented and produces end outcomes that are unfailingly similar. Instead of addressing gender inequalities present in the two systems, the empowerment discourse glosses over structural inequalities in favor of establishing individual-level responsibilization. In this paper, I will use the examples of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act and alternative to incarceration programs to demonstrate the culmination of the empowerment discourse in the welfare and penal systems. Before contemporary welfare and penal reforms advanced the notion of empowerment, the tendency discourse was largely applied towards women within these institutional structures. In their reliance of the paternalist state, women in the welfare and penal systems were directly linked to the notion of dependency or the social status of subordination. But as cultural shifts towards gender equality began to take place, institutional policies attempted to create equal treatment of women and men. The stigma of dependency was pushed in order to establish the appeal of independence and empowerment. The welfare state wielded the freedom of wage labor, while the penal state emphasized the importance of personal responsibility for criminal actions and subsequent rehabilitation. The empowerment discourse pushed towards responsibilization, choice, and individualism. However, the push towards empowerment left out structural considerations entirely. The aim of degendering the two systems through the empowerment of women failed to take into account the social realities of gender inequality that prevent it from successfully carrying out. Societal limitations such as lack of access to education, struggling labor markets, rising unemployment rates, the development of the drug market, and racism are ignored in applications of the empowerment discourse. In seeking the source of the growing magnitude of societal problems, the empowerment discourse lets societal failings become translated into individualized failings. When women are put on welfare or in prison, the attitude is to find individual-level answers rather than ask social-level questions. Self-esteem and other feminized characteristics are treated to be both the cause and the effect of welfare and incarceration. When we ask, "Why did you become a single parent? Why did you go on welfare?" we are not seeking social causes. We are looking for an individual-level response. The social problems that almost all of these women faced were put in the shadows behind the women's psychological diagnosis. Not only does empowerment hold them accountable for rehabilitation and treatment, all of their faults and failings are laid upon their shoulders as well. The implication of this attitude is that past policies encouraged bad behavior from the welfare recipients and inmates, ultimately leading to their former dependency. In order to move away from normative female dependency and towards progressive ideas of empowerment, welfare policies have become increasingly punitive. Under the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation of 1996, PRWORA, every adult is obligated to engage in the workforce regardless of gendered care obligations. They are required to work a specific number of hours in order to receive financial assistance, and there is a 5-year lifetime eligibility limit. Welfare recipients are sanctioned for behaviors with the punishment of benefit reduction or denial and can no longer depend on federal welfare benefits without abiding to these strict work requirements and time caps. The empowerment of the welfare population looked towards self-governance and accountability. More and more, the discourses take on a certain kind of fatalism. Welfare recipients are reminded that they are making empowered choices day to day. Nevertheless, PRWORA largely ignores the structural constraints in the labor market that push women out of the market. When women fail to successfully integrate into the labor market, it is treated as a personal failing. While the structure of the welfare state has gone from feminine dependency to masculine logic, the prison system was unequivocally constructed around a masculine structure. The pathology of female criminality was in the belief that crime is inherently against feminine norms. In order to make sense of the disjoint, penal paternalism valorized dependency in order to affirm the possibility of reform. Past victimization in one form or another was used to decouple agency from criminality. Forms of support, discipline, surveillance, and guidance were necessary to help inmates successfully develop the feminine condition of dependency. In an attempt to remove the dependency discourse, female empowerment was first designed to highlight that the structural inequities experienced by women prisoners relate to broader gender inequalities. But under the empowerment discourse, there remains an underlying desire to emotionalize the problem. There is the enduring notion that criminal behavior in women is caused by low self-esteem and disempowerment. As mentioned with the treatment of participants in the welfare system, social structures are still addressed separately from individual circumstances. At times, the staff did more than simply bracket their social marginalization. They actively denied it by insisting that such experiences were literally in the inmates' heads. The view towards incarceration tends to be largely feminized, and it does not take into account the harsher social realities that they need to face. The idea that moving outside the official boundaries of state prisons has been treated as a gender-friendly idea. Visions and Project Rehabilitate Women are two of the many alternative to incarceration programs that have been developed in progressive penal reform. In these programs, the empowerment strategies that they are given are not a result of personal choice, but determined by the wider penal structure. The determination of a meaningful and responsible or empowering action is ultimately done by judges, parole boards, correctional officers, and therapists, not by the prisoner. The so-called empowerment and responsibilization of the prisoner is simply feigned under the system's jurisdiction. Although the institutional structures do not exert overt expressions of power, the same paternalistic control is revealed. Haney describes the myth of empowerment within these programs as the promise that everything would be okay in these women's lives if they just dropped masks, let their pain come to the fore, held hands, and wished inequality away. When the women are released from these alternative to incarceration programs, they are left without any practical resources, thus causing them to recidivate. Similarly, women on welfare cannot be responsible for the non-existent labor market that they are forced into. As empowerment delegates personal responsibility to the individuals, responsibility of larger institutions are broken down. The state shifts responsibility towards various directions and simply maintains a coordinating role in the systems. Perwara is often interpreted as the culmination of reforms to defederalize public assistance. From an institutional standpoint, none of the empowered reform policies offer any solutions to reduce crime or poverty. Policy objectives have disconnected from external reference and the social problems that were originally designed to alleviate. Hyper-incarceration has become a household term as the incarcerated population has soared into the millions. While the number of individuals receiving welfare provisions has fallen by 53%, the number of incarcerated women has increased sevenfold since 1980, reaching 1.2 million in 2002. As the two are overlapped in their resources, spending for one inversely reflects the spending for the other. The shifting of resources between the two institutions has not made the deep societal changes needed, and ultimately proves the ineptitude the empowerment discourse. The penal welfare convergence contains fundamental flaws in the discursive approach. Although it provides personal insight into the women's lives, structural changes are largely ignored. The current systems uphold libertarian ideals of individuality and personal responsibility, but fail to consider critical gender analysis. Without addressing gender inequalities, it only reinforces a patriarchal system that puts women at a basic disadvantage. Overall, the discursive framing of empowerment has simply amplified the problems of the welfare and punishment systems. Victimization and dependency have been removed from these institutions, but only to be replaced with a false sense of empowerment. The two systems continue to reproduce social relations of hierarchy while continuing to stigmatize them and deny them social and economic capital needed for actual empowerment.